detail, but not too much detail. So the more that we can hear from town officials about what would be helpful, the better we can do in providing information to all of you. And then I know there was some discussion about the regional agreement at the May 5th meeting, and so we will provide you some information about the laws and regulations that govern the regional agreement. And a lot of what we do is governed by, as much as what you do is governed by laws and regulations that are set forth by the state. And so some of what we do, we just do because we have to comply with the law. So we have provided some excerpts of the law in the presentation as well that may be helpful to you. But before we start, Cheryl has prepared packets of information. This information is very similar to what we provided when we met with the Finance Committee and went through our budget.
If you don't mind, I'll sit here to run the PowerPoint. I know. So I will describe for you what's in our packet. Everything on the left-hand side has to do with our budget, and as we go through the PowerPoint, I'll be pointing out to some of these documents. On the left-hand side is this little cheat sheet that we put up for our school staff last week, so just our budget by the numbers type of thing. And behind that are our revenues, all of our reports due to revenues. So if you'd like, we just get started, and I'll point out to these documents as we get to them.
So I asked Cheryl to try to create an image because I'm a visual person, and one of the things that I think is often hard to understand is for folks, myself included, when I wasn't part of a district administrative team, is how is our budget developed, and then where are the revenue sources? So I tried to come up with an image that would make sense to me, and this may be too simplistic, but it helps me to explain it to folks that don't, like our staff members and things like that in the district. But our district is, the actual budget is really by law under the control of the school committee. So they develop the budget, and that bucket represents what we're, our current status with our budget this year is a little over $35 million. State aid and district revenues, district reserves fund that budget in most years. Of course, state aid is what we consider to be the problem that causes you to have difficulty funding our budget and us to provide what we need for our children. And then the towns, each of the member towns has their assessment, which is only part of our budget, and all of that goes into to make up that $35 million. And then what's challenging is we have over 876 line items that filter out of that budget into various expenses that we have. And that's what makes the budget so complex, because with the 5 schools, or 7 schools that we run, we have to break all of those expenses down by school in addition to the budget categories. And Cheryl can explain all those categories much more readily than I can. But your assessment isn't necessarily our budget. If you want to just turn to the next
If I could just
okay, go ahead.
Point me out as we get to the next screen. So member town assessments are one funding source to our budget. And when I listened to that video of May, whatever, I think what I was hearing was the town would like to know how their $5.7 million is being spent. And just as you don't prepare your town budget by saying property taxes are funding these expenses, that's similar to you asking, what is our assessment funding? So the town assessments are just a funding source for our budget. It's not necessarily, it's not dollar for dollar. We can take each assessment from each member town and say it's funding this much in our budget. It's just one of many, 3 funding sources. So this has been said time and time again. It's my 18th year at Quabbin. And when we go to town meeting, people say, your budget's gone up for Hubbardston 8.5%. No, our budget's gone up 2.8%. The assessment has gone up 8.5%. And that's because of other variables other than just our budget. So I hope that we can kind of go through those so it's easier to understand what the difference is between the assessment for a town and what our budget is. So our district's budget, as I heard in the video, that we don't have a budget that can say we're spending this much on this and this much on this. This is actually our budget. It's called the Appropriation Control Report. This is the document by which the school committee approves a budget and allows for budget transfers between line items. These 18 different categories. I'd like to explain the big budget book that no one wants to see. I'll just explain how the three major reports work. This is the line item budget. You can see this, all of these documents are online as well. The line item budget is about 800 lines long. This report is subtotal by function. What the function is, it's a 4-digit code, account number, over here, that's assigned by the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. We subtotal these accounts by those functions and highlighted in blue. Those highlights in blue are then transferred over to this report called the function subtotal to appropriation category. It's like a crosswalk. How do you get from all of your line items to what the school committee approves? So everything highlighted in blue on the line items comes over to this intermediate report. Those are highlighted by the categories the school committee approves them on in yellow. And just those subtotals in yellow come over to this report. And again, these 18 categories are what the school committee decided in 2003 by which they operate their district and approve a budget. When I came to the district in 2001, the Department of Education put these new, at the time, account structures into place. The district had not used them in their fiscal '02 budget like they should have. So for FY03, we started using the department's required coding structure. The school committee then revisited that before we decided to put together the FY13 budget. So it has been reviewed once since it was put into place just 7 years ago. So I hope that clears up how to read our reports.
It definitely helps me. At least I've got more of a guidance here.
One of the things on this little chart, this is in my visual thinking that Cheryl's helping with that. This little doll, the image of the dollar down here, this is a slide that is reused in our budget presentation for the school committee. It shows actually how the percentages of the way our budget is broken up. So you can see 51% of our budget is supporting teaching and learning, 17% is for benefits, 3% is for district administration and legal, 2% for technology. So that is a breakdown of the big categories of how the budget's spent too. And I think that may have been a question that was raised at some point. So that might be a helpful chart to look at as well.
So moving forward now from the expense side, the budget, to the revenue side, superintendent asked me to put together, I went too far, to put together a very concise mathematical equation for the staff to understand. So we did a presentation for the staff last week. And so this is what I came up with, and I hope it will clearly show how assessments are calculated based on our budget. Because debt is assessed separately to member towns based on a separate formula, I subtracted that from our total budget number. So check my math. Total budget of $35 million minus the $128,000 worth of debt would leave you just over $35 million. Then you subtract the amount of aid you're getting from the state, which is $17 million in the House Ways and Means budget. And you would subtract any district reserves that are being used to help offset the increase in assessments. In the past few years, we've used this number, $758,000. That leaves you with the amount of the budget that has not yet been funded. And that amount comes from the towns. That's the very basic formula of funding a regional school budget. Take your budget minus what you get from the state. There's so many districts that don't have any money to put in from reserve. So the money either comes from the state or by county assessments. For FY20, where we currently are in the state's budget process, we're $16.6 million short. And that's what is assessed to the towns. Support is the assessment. The base amount of the assessment is calculated by the Department of Revenue, not calculated by me, calculated by the Department of Revenue, based on your reports that you submit to the state for your local wealth, your local property values, and your average resident income.
What's that referred to? The net? Is that
This
the
is required. This is required local contribution.
Thank you.
So in Barry, the base that was on the, again, it changes every step of the Commonwealth's budget process. Based on the House Ways and Means budget, $3.233 million for Barry. Those are the numbers for all of our 5 towns, equaling $10.2 million. So now from the $16 million that we needed to support our budget, we subtract the $10 million, which is the required local contribution. That leaves $6.38 million that needs to be apportioned. Apportion means divided by some formula. Our formula by our regional agreement is by how many students were in Quabbin on October 1st last year. Not this past October, a year ago. And then it gets apportioned out. We do the math and add those two pieces together. That's how your assessment comes to be. Again, this is a mandated formula. There are 2 ways in which to do a formula for a regional school assessment. One is called a statutory formula, which this is. Take the required local contribution, share anything that's over that amount by some formula in your regional agreement. The other way to do it is to take the required local contributions and share them in a different manner. That would be laid out in a regional agreement. Our regional agreement does not do that at this time. So is that clear, how the numbers?
So you're saying if the 5 towns, and I'm guessing it starts with their school committee reps, if they wanted to adjust the regional agreement to, say, take the base and the allocation lines and put them into one lump and then come up with our own shared expense plan in the agreement, we can do that. As long as the base is still based on the state's calculation of the regional assessment, not now by town assessments.
Yes.
Okay.
And a caveat to that is no individual town could go below that number for a total assessment, below their base for total assessment.
Okay, I got you.
That would have to be written into the regional agreement, amendment to the regional agreement. And if that formula were to be used, it needs to be approved by all 5 towns at town meeting every year and then reported to the Commissioner of Education. It's not something that we can say we're going to do once and move ahead. It has to be agreed upon by every town every year at town meeting, before our annual town meeting, and the Commissioner has to okay it every year.
I think if we rewrite the district agreement, then it can become a permanent issue. We wouldn't have to visit it every year. And
The law
I think that's what we're
the
looking
law
at.
says it will be revisited every year by vote of the town. All 5 towns must agree, and the Commissioner of Education has the final say.
And why doesn't our regional agreement get reviewed every year right now?
It's not, she's not.
I'm talking about rewriting the agreement.
I'm not there yet.
If you rewrite the agreement, you can have the agreement rewritten at any point as long as you follow the appropriate process. But if you choose to calculate the assessments differently than using the statutory method, which we currently
We were
use.
talking about if we rewrote it, we'd probably put that new regional agreement and rewrite the agreement.
Okay, well,
So-
can we get there
Yeah.
after we talk about our
Sure.
budget, because we have information.
Right.
Sure.
So just talking back to that very simple formula, it becomes this spreadsheet, which is not only for the next year's budget, but the current year's budget as well, and does a comparative. So the 3 main categories for revenue sources for the regional school district budget is state aid revenue, which is shown on this report there in the blue, the district revenue I talked about in purple, and then the member town assessments. And those 3 categories add up to our total budget so that we have a balanced budget when we bring it to annual town meeting. The superintendent would now like to talk about what we've done to try to increase that state aid number for the towns.
So I'm sure many of you are aware that what we feel is the main problem with the challenges with budget statewide is that the state is not funding providing the funds that they need to provide, that they should be providing to fund schools. And 4 years ago, now, there was a Foundation Review Commission that studied the formula for providing funding for schools in the state of Massachusetts, and there were some very significant recommendations that came out of that, which basically said the formula hasn't changed, hasn't kept up with the changes in the cost of education, especially in the areas of providing employee health care, health insurance, special education costs, costs to educate children as English language learners, where English is not their first language, and low-income students. And there were some recommendations made about ways that that formula needed to change to make sure that it was equitable for all children across the state of Massachusetts. Nothing has happened with those recommendations for the past 4 years. This year, however, the governor in his budget recognized that there needed to be some changes to the formula, and his budget proposed some recommendations. He proposed a 7-year plan for rolling out those, getting the formula to the point that it's meeting the requirements of what it should. And what he chose to fund initially were the gaps, primarily in the areas of costs for educating students who are English learners and homeless students, and not necessarily funding the health care costs and special education costs as much toward the end of his 7-year plan. That's problematic for our district, as you know, because we don't have as many homeless students or low-income students or English learner students as maybe some of the urban areas do. All school districts, on the other hand, have the special education costs and the health insurance costs, and so as a result, the governor's budget didn't provide much in way of funding for most school districts in the state of Massachusetts. Over 280, I think, school districts only got the minimum $20 per student, including our district. So at that point, we, some of the school committee members and I and Cheryl, we started attending some of the hearings for the joint committee on education in Boston, advocating and testifying for additional funding for schools. One of the areas that we've been working on very hard in our district, in conjunction with other districts, is trying to get some attention paid to the needs and unique needs of rural school districts. Being a rural school district costs more because you're transporting students further. You have, the needs. Most rural districts have declining enrollments, as we do, which doesn't give us the opportunity for efficiency of scale. And so there's some proposals at the legislative level to provide some unique funding, funding source that is consistent for rural school districts and recognizes the challenges that rural school districts face. So far, that money has not come through in the budget process, but we know that the budget process is only about, we're on step 4 right now. We're at the House Ways and Means budget, or the Senate Ways and Means, excuse me. The Senate budget is now amendments are being filed at the Senate, and one of the most frustrating parts about the state budget process is it doesn't align with the local budget process or the school budget process. So by the time the state finishes its work and we actually know what fundings we are going to have to help support the school budget, all of our town meetings in our 5-member towns will be complete. And that makes it very difficult for us to plan, and it makes it very difficult for you to plan as well. And when I testified at the legislature, I really tried to share. I testified with the panel of superintendents, and we coordinated our messages. And what I really tried to talk about was how that, in order to, if you help the schools, you help the towns. Our municipalities are not able to provide what they need for their citizens because the state is not funding the schools well either. So I tried to help them understand that it isn't just a school issue, it's a town issue and a city issue as well as a school issue. We have to educate our children but we have to provide for our citizens. So hopefully we'll see some additional funding come out of this work in the Senate and the conference committee. But unfortunately, we don't expect those numbers before town meetings. And that's very challenging. And we understand that. But I guess it's a process that we have to live with for the time being.
So if the Senate budget, when it's finalized, is different in any way for our numbers than the House budget, it goes with conference committee, and they go and they battle it out, and they come to consensus. After vetoes from the governor or overrides by the Senate and the House, the final budget is finalized. If the required local contributions change again, we must change our calculation. And if we don't have 4 out of the 5 towns approving their assessment, thereby approving our budget, and those numbers have changed all, we need to go back to you with a new assessment, and if it's $1 higher than the assessment that was approved on the annual town meeting floor, it must be voted again. That's part of the statute. So we are hoping that we will have these numbers from the Senate so that we'll know that if there are differences from the House, and if we are going to need to wait for the conference committee budget to come out. That happened to us once. We didn't get the final numbers until November,
That was just a couple years ago.
quite a few years ago.
All right. Something else. Oh, it was Prop 2 override questions that happened a few years ago, right, in a couple towns that held up can all towns provide the assessment? Like some did and some didn't, and then we were waiting until late in the year to, okay.
At least after December 1st. So before we move into the governance piece and talk a little bit about the regional agreement, are there things that would be helpful? Do you have specific questions about what's in our budget this year? Is there information that you would like to provide for us around how to better communicate with town officials, better explain how we're working, what we're working on? We really want to make this process as transparent as possible and as clear as possible. And we talk a lot about that at the school committee level, but hearing directly from town officials helps us to understand. I know that you're looking at a lot of budgets, and you're busy people, and you have more than just budgets to worry about. So again, we try to balance clarity with transparency, and sometimes it doesn't sound, at least from what I heard on your video, that maybe we've struck an appropriate balance. And so helping us to understand what that balance would be, we'll try to meet your needs.
Gotcha. I guess I would rather start with the other 2 Board of Selectmen members. If you had a thought on, is there something that might help with the presentation of the budget, clarity? And then I would like to go to some of the Finance Committee members in the room if they have any thoughts on that.
Well, I think this is a much better breakdown than we've seen before, so it gives us, obviously 18 lines, which is better than just seeing the budget, and better than seeing 1,000 lines. So
As I said,
not-
all of these are in the book. These were part of the presentation for the public hearing that we had in March.
Okay.
This is the structure that we've had since fiscal 2003.
I think it's reasonable. It would take time to go through and get familiar with it to see if there's anything else we wanted to see, but I don't think this is an unreasonable breakdown at all.
So now we want to go into.
Oh, wait, I'm sorry. Did Mark or Claire have any questions on, or something to add to this particular thing, being the Finance Committee? If any of this is presented differently, would it help you?
I think we have a pretty good understanding of our budget.
Yeah, the only question I have is the reserves that you take. What actually is your reserves? Where does it come from,
So it's actually broken down on this sheet of where the money is coming from, and it's also written in the assessment letter that comes to the town boards, because part of it is from E&D, and it needs to be told to the towns it's coming from E&D. So again, on this revenue sheet on the first page, under district revenue, this budget is being funded with $10,000 from E&D, which is similar to a town's free cash, for a contribution to OPEB requirements, our trust fund. $417,000 is coming from E&D to help reduce the cost of these assessments. Because if we reduce that number that the district was putting in by $417,000, that $417,000 will flow down to town assessments. Approximately $212,000 is a reimbursement from Medicaid each year that we get. We have a preschool program, a pre-K program, that we charge tuition, and that's part of the funding source, is $45,000. We get a reimbursement from the U.S. Navy for our ROTC program, for not only part of the instructors' salaries, but also part of the expenses for the program. We get about $74,000 a year from that, and that totals up to the $758,000.
I appreciate it.
How do you decide how much of that you will use towards your budget?
How much of what?
Reserves.
The reserves? The
Yeah.
reserves are just the E&D clear, so the other ones have been constant for the last several years.
Yeah.
E&D is really, after we take a look at what the assessments would be based on our very first budget, even
Yeah.
before we even know what the governor's gonna put out on the floor, it's a conversation that the school committee has. We have to know what our certified number is. We didn't get our certified number in plenty of time to have from very first budget discussions. Do you want to take this one? You can take it.
Sure. Any other specific budget? Well, certainly, as you review those documents, if you have any additional questions, we're always open to, again, emails. We'd be happy to come to another meeting if that would be helpful. Anything we can do to increase the communication.
The
We're
only
very happy to.
question I have, and you don't need to dig deep right now, maybe you could just explain to me how to go find it myself, but say the pre-K program, you're showing the revenue that we get to help offset based on your tuitions. What is the cost, or where would I find the cost for pre-K to see how much the tuition is covering the cost for pre-K? Is it a complete coverage? Is it a potential revenue, or is it a loss? And how do we see that? How could we find that?
The pre-K program is not a program that's funded by the general fund budget, so you won't see it in any of these documents. It's a revolving account that's allowed by Mass General Law. And so we bring in at least $45,000 that we post the salaries of the people working in the program to the general budget. This helps offset that. Each quarter, we have a report of all of our revolving accounts that goes to the school committee at their the first meeting after the close of the quarter, and it reviews on that report, revenues are taken in, what expenditures are paid out, and then at the end, there'll be a balance of $45,000 that we transfer to general fund.
Okay, so if I'm looking at the revenues here and you say the 45,000, you're saying that 45,000 is coming from that
Fees
revolving account?
Right, from the revolving account, that the fees go into, that parents pay. So the fees go into the revolving account, and then the general ledger transfer brings it into the general operating budget as a revenue source.
Okay.
And how much of the salaries that you said the salaries come out of the general fund for that program? How much of those salaries cost? And is the 45,000 contributed after payback on the salaries? Or are those salaries absorbed in the general fund?
The salaries come from general fund. This is a partial payment from that account to cover those salaries. I can't
So
tell
that's
you
what I'm saying.
off.
So the intention is that's just to cover the salaries at that point.
I
To
don't have any
offset
of
some of
those
the
reports.
cost of salary.
Some of the
It
cost.
doesn't offset the entire cost of the program by any measure. Our preschool program, in our preschool program, we educate many special education children, starting at age 3, and we cannot charge any tuition for those children at all. So some children who don't have special education needs do pay a tuition to attend our preschool, but many children who attend our preschool do not pay any tuition at all.
Is that a policy just
State
because
law.
it's state law?
And federal law.
We have to educate them free from the ages of 2 years, 8 months. And many of those students are coming into us that early. Most of the program is paid for from federal grant for special education students. The fees, I'm sorry I wasn't clear, the fees only come from students who attend as role model students, regular education students.
So it's not an elective preschool program. it's mandatory program.
For the special education, and if we have too many students for the role model regular education students, it's by lottery. Attendance is by lottery.
What I'm
Yes.
saying is,
So it's not
you couldn't elect to
pre-K
say, we're not gonna have any pre-K,
No.
therefore we don't need to have it. You have to
No.
have a pre-K.
Yes.
For special ed
Okay.
students, yes.
No, that definitely helps a lot, for me. Do you have more you want to continue with?
We
Well,
do, because we want to get to the regional agreement.
let's go ahead and do that real quick then.
Okay, so we just, Cheryl was good enough to provide some excerpts from the laws, Mass General laws that govern regional school districts and regional school agreements, and regulations. So Mass General laws, Department of Secondary, Elementary and Secondary Education School Committee, and our regional agreement. Those are all the bodies in documents that govern our work as a regional school district.
So if you don't mind, I'll run through these quickly. These are laws that I'm very familiar with. I'm doing this job 23 years now. So the first Mass General law was put into place to put regional school districts together is Chapter 71, Section 16, which defines the status, powers, and duties of a regional school district. And it says, shall be a body politic and corporate. They are autonomous to any town department. They are similar to municipal school committees, although they are given further duties of assessing member towns for expenses of a budget and adopting an annual budget. That's not how it works in the municipal school district. Chapter 71:16A talks about the school committee selection and the powers and duties of officers. Powers and duties and liabilities of a regional school district shall be vested in and exercised by a regional school district committee. The organization of such committee is up to the regional agreement. Section 16B talks about budgets. This is a very long law. This is where the assessment comes in. So by vote of the local appropriating authority, that is annual town meeting. By vote of the local appropriating authority to appropriate the municipality's apportioned share, your assessment, for the regional school district budget shall constitute approval of the annual regional school district budget. So by the towns approving their assessment, they have approved our budget. And we need 2/3 of our member towns, 2/3 of 5. Unfortunately, would mean 4 out of 5 towns for us. Chapter 14B, Regional School District Formation and Procedures, talks about the regional agreement. The method for apportioning expenses of the regional school district, which is what we talked about a little earlier. We use the statutory method. If we choose any other method, it needs to be in the regional agreement. The method by which the agreement may be amended, and we'll talk about that in a minute, and the detailed procedure for the preparation of an annual budget, all of which are currently in our regional agreement. We also have Department of Elementary and Secondary Education regulations that govern us. This is 603 Commonwealth of Massachusetts Regulation 41.00. The budget shall be classified into such line items as the regional school committee shall determine. And it also talks again about local appropriating authority for the assessments. This chapter of the regulations also talks about transfers of one line item to another. Shall be effective upon approval of the regional school committee by majority vote, and that authority cannot be delegated. 99% of what we do is governed by these statutes and regulations. Now
Could
are
you
we?
go back half a second? Such approval shall be by majority vote of the regional school committee unless otherwise specified in the regional agreement.
And I believe our regional agreement says by weighted vote. Instead of majority vote, it's majority weighted vote.
Now, what I'm just trying to better understand there is, when it says unless otherwise specified in the regional agreement, does that mean anything prior in that sentence can be modified by regional agreement? Therefore, the regional agreement could transfer the school committee to a larger body
There is no larger body in the school committee. They
It could
are-
be one representative from each select board as well. In other
They
words, you
are
define
body-
a different body for certain transfers. Kind of like,
I understand what you're saying.
no, a little bit you do, but a little bit you don't. What I'm trying to say more like transfers after the town approves a budget have to be approved by the finance committee,
No,
not the board of selectmen.
no.
No, for a municipality, that's the case.
Mhm.
We cannot go from one department line item to another department or without going back to the finance committee, which is not the board of selectmen. And the board of selectmen is the closer reference to the school committee, not the finance committee and the school committee. So my question is, can there be a similar separate finance committee drafted into a regional agreement that can play that role? Because that says unless otherwise specified in the regional agreement. That's my question.
I was
That's
once
all.
told by my first superintendent that I don't have the authority to interpret,
Understood.
but that, I believe that interpretation is it's by majority vote or a different type of vote. Because if you go back to here, a body politic and corporate, they are autonomous. They make those decisions. The school committee makes those decisions. If it were to be by any other method of vote, which I believe our regional agreement is, by a weighted vote. A majority vote is simple hand vote, more than 7 on our committee. A weighted vote is a different vote.
I think we'd have to read the full language of that and understand, because I think you're correct, whatever the agreement says.
No, and that was just my question.
If there's not-
Because I didn't even know if we could create a school finance committee that still is elected, but it's now referenced to, like you said, the politic group that is the school district. And there's no crossover to the different town elected boards. And that's, I just was asking.
Our regional agreement also talks about how to amend the agreement. The agreement may be amended may be initiated by 2/3 vote of the weighted vote of all school committee members, or a petition signed by 10% of the registered voters in any one of the member towns. Such amendment shall take effect upon its acceptance by all member towns by a majority vote, that's town meeting vote, and upon approval of the Commissioner of Elementary and Secondary Education. He has the final say. So we've gone through this in 2014. There was a regional agreement committee put together in 2013. There was one town official from each town appointed by the Board of Selectmen, plus one alternate member. There was one school committee member from each town, the superintendent and myself as non-voting members. And there was legal counsel at the table. The process was 7 meetings from October 13, 2013 to February 26, 2014. The amendment was then passed by a majority vote at all 5 town meetings. And the amendment was approved by the Commissioner of Elementary and Secondary Education. So that's all we have with that.
So we thought it would help, just to give you some context, some sources, laws that you can reference, if you want to learn more about that regional agreement process or any of the laws and regulations that govern our work, and the work of the school committee.
Yes, ma'am.
Real point on the 2013, when we got the regional agreement together, when we had to rewrite it. The regional agreement was 1985, so it was pre-1993. So you had a language in there that of hiring school committee to hire principals. Every reform law took out the hiring perspective of school committees, personnel in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and put it in the onus of the superintendent. In turn, our powers, in essence, aside from the body politic and what we are can do by law, aside from selecting a superintendent, assistant superintendent, or a title thereof, the finance director or business manager, the special education director, supervisor, and school nurses, believe it or not, is still in the language for school committee to hire, along with adopting a budget, ability to borrow, to bond, and those type of things, and work with towns on that, and also dealing with curriculum, Even though the state set those standards for curriculum, we then had to use and outline with the administrations to work with the curriculum, what materials to use in programs. And 4 would be policies, educational policies, not only for students, but educational policies in the workplace for our adults and the staff. So think about that. That was 1985, and the agreement, I've been on the committee for 12 years. Thank you for another 3 years. But that was a feat in itself. I was chair at the time, but I'm just we. It's a we that makes it work. It was everybody at the table from every town worked it, updated the agreement, made the changes that we had to of what we have now, the 2014 agreement. You had complete 100% agreement. You can see other towns across the Commonwealth that when they try to open up the agreements, they have problems. We don't mind. Matter of fact, you know where we're at. And any questions you have, you are more than welcome to come to the budgets. You know. You have the appropriation commitment not only from 2003, revised in 2013, also those 18 items, and the backup is not 806 line items on top of that. So even several years ago when we want to go, but we'll go line by line by line by line to be able to justify, not only from the administration's perspective up to a budget, for us to approve, because at the end of the day, it's the townsfolk that voted at every community for the Quabbin Regional School District. So I'm not speaking as vice chair, I'm not speaking for the entire committee, but I can certainly say will always be an appetite to not only revise, to look at. But the last time we did it was 2014, and it was 1985 prior, to align the language on the state level, language that we had to follow under those kind of regulations. So I hear and I do know there are times people like, oh, we are extremely transparent. I always love that word. There are people in the audience here that have been involved for 15, 20 years. We'll answer any question, come to the meetings, come to the budget, and we'll reduce when we can. But we also are trying to do best programming, adequate funding, the state not following through, and we understand the realization of when the towns pony up, and they do and have, to have an educational system that is beneficial for all our students in the Quabbin. So I just wanted to say that even though we rewrote it and able to get complete agreement in 2014, we are always willing to look and work together to make a better agreement, to even reduce schools, declining enrollment, whatever we can do, repurpose schools, utilize buildings in better ways. You talk about efficiencies and effectiveness. That's our job, and we try to do as best we can. And I'll be honest, I want to make sure we hire, as you do as well. I have the right chief executive sitting at the table, as well as my finance person, to be able to educate, not only look at every item, but if I want to know a $250 item, where it is and why it isn't spent, where did it go, it can be articulated and answered with truth and with understanding. We don't hide. We also work with 6 collective bargaining agreements. We have done very well in working with our staff to retain staff, to keep staff, and we also have reduced staff, 67 positions in 5 years. Those are the realities. But I know sometimes people like to say, oh, we're not doing it, it's that $35 million budget, the declining enrollment, why isn't it going down? When you look at other concerns and costs of the insurances, the transportation, the needs of students, everything, and sometimes even people not paying their lunch bill, we have to absorb. So when you look at that and say, what do you do right by kids and want people to be here? I'll answer any question, and yes, I have no problem being part of, if you'd like to revisit and look at the regional agreement that we all have to agree to.
Mary Jane?
Yes, I think we have to work on the people coming to the meetings, the annual town meetings. We only have 150 people or so out of the 5,000 people that are voting for the budget. How fair is that?
I agree. I haven't quite figured out how to get them there. It's almost like you gotta have some huge public crazy bylaw that might be proposed that causes people to say, I don't want that, so I'll show up. Or I do want that, so I'll show up. And then the budget is just something that happens. Like, a lot of people get, I don't know, I think a lot of people that come to the town meeting, when they see a budget, they feel like at this point, there's nothing they can do about it. It is what it is. And so what are they gonna say? No? Well, no, I agree they can, but I'm trying to come up with, why don't people show up? You know, and I think it's because they feel like if they show up, it's already too late. This is what's happening. And for some of them, they don't have the time or the ability to hit those subcommittees or other boards that are working this till it gets to town. So they show up and it's like, this is what I do. And after they do it a few years, all of a sudden they stop showing up because it's just, and it's done. Or they listen to a bylaw debate that might matter to them and then they're involved. And then it goes away and then it's routine budgeting. And budget is budget. And a lot of people will say, well, we either elected this person, we elected that person, I'm going with it, so I don't need to show up. They have that right to feel that way, because they're right. They did elect the finance committee, they did elect the different boards that are building these budgets. And those people went and hired the people that are helping build the budgets. So I can't fault them for saying I'm comfortable with the people that we put in place to make these decisions, but you asked Mary Jane, I'm suggesting these might be some of the reasons why people don't show up.
Thank you.
I don't agree with it though. Yes, Claire?
I'm just curious on the school choice. Is that still benefiting us?
Yes, absolutely.
School choice?
Yes. We're very careful about how we accept school choice students. We don't, we fill what we call filling empty seats. So for example, if we have a grade level or a classroom where, let's say we have 20 children in a classroom, we would accept some school choice students to bring that class size up maybe to 25, but we would never accept more students than that would cause us to add an additional classroom teacher or something like that. So we look, right now I'm in the process of looking at class sizes across the district and making those decisions about where we can accept students and where we are turning some students away in certain grade levels. We try not to, but we make strategic decisions about how we bring those students into our district. The most difficult grade levels to predict are kindergarten, because sometimes, you know, even though we have a kindergarten registration process and a kindergarten screening process, oftentimes our kindergarten numbers grow during the summer, so we're very careful about accepting school choice in kindergarten until we're really sure that we're not going to get class sizes that will cost us, cause us to add staff. So.
And how do you calculate how the towns pay for the schools?
It's governed by
State.
law, it's state law.
Just to clarify a little more of what Sheila was saying, we did a chart, I don't have it in this presentation, the chart for the last 8 years with school choice, was it ranges between 12% and 14% of our student body.
About 2%.
So we were asked at a meeting in another town, I think it was a finance committee meeting, why are your school choice numbers declining? And in reality, the number of students who come to the district on school choice is declining because our entire, school age population in Massachusetts, especially in rural areas, is declining. It's a statewide issue. And so Cheryl, I asked Cheryl to calculate the percentage of school choice students relative to the enrollment in our district, and it's been consistent. I think I have the chart here in front of me. It's been consistent between 12 and 13% for the past. This is the chart here. I can share it with you. We can send it to you. But from 2011-12, it was 12.74%, and you can see it's been a consistent percentage between 12 and almost 14% for the last 8 or 9 years. So
It's been exactly 12, 14% of what? Of our-
percent of students in the district
Total
who are
enrollment?
coming to us for school choice.
Okay, and I asked at our last meeting, when we had the review for New Braintree School, and I never got an answer, what percentage of our students, the number of our students leave our district for school choice? I've never seen that number yet.
Because you don't look
It's
at anything that is
it's
shared, because you
been
don't
in-
want to see the book, Brett.
it's
I
been-
It's like right in here.
I asked it
It's
at our
right.
last meeting, we never got to it, unfortunately. It's just a curious number.
I can certainly send that to you, it's part of our budget presentation.
It's all right. We'll work on that.
We obviously struggle with our budget and look at things and look at the school numbers, and I ask these questions not to be a jerk about things. I need to have these numbers, or I can't make a meaningful and thoughtful consideration before I make a suggestion or ask for something. And part of what I was just looking at here was your chart on this page. It says we had a 26.99% drop in students over 10 years and a 31.78 drop in teachers. But we've seen a 16% increase in budget over that same time frame. So if we have a third of a drop in students and a third of a drop in teachers, then our budget's gone up by, 16%. The state was almost level funded over that time. If anything, was down a couple $100,000. But it's strange to see, the number of students we're serving, the number of teachers we're employing go down by a third, and the budget jump by an eighth, or about an eighth.
And that has to do with the fact that, so when we reduce, so you're just seeing a reduction in teachers, but we can't necessarily reduce all staff members proportionately to the number of students.
Those aren't included in classroom teachers.
Okay.
So, page 24.
I'm still listening.
Oh, that's okay, no, I don't.
So on this chart that we put together that shows in a 10-year period, our school enrollment decreased by 30% and classroom teachers reduced by just about 32%. Overall staffing was at 15%. Because classroom teachers are you're teaching your core subject classes. But what we've had to increase in the last 10 years are things that Sheila talked about earlier for students with needs. Speech therapists aren't classroom teachers, but we've increased them. Instructional coaches, intervention specialists, intervention tutors, clinical coordinator, licensed social worker, board certified behavioral specialists, and adjustment counselors. So although we've reduced classroom teachers, we've had to add all of these supports, which help to increase
I'm not trying to
budget.
anger you. I'm just trying to point out that when you see a third of a reduction in students and a third of a reduction in classroom teachers,
Yes.
but a substantial increase in the budget, it would be more meaningful for this budget season. This is, I do appreciate everything you have here for us understanding how your budget's done and looking at line items in the future. But to look at the budget and where the money goes now, you have to wonder why what has gone up so drastically. In other words, if you gave me your budget from 10 years ago and said this much went to teachers, and I had this sheet from 10 years ago compared to this sheet now, then we could see what really happened that drove us up 16%. And we don't know if it's something we need to work with the school committee on, or if we need to work on structuring the school agreement, or we just have to work on the state harder. I don't know. But I do know that as the budget keeps going up, and we're close to 58% of our town budget, it's unsustainable for this town. The town works much the same as yours does for a budget. We have employees, we have, debt, and we have everything from utilities and personnel and vehicles and equipment and maintenance and structures and roads and the same thing. And we have a much smaller budget we have to work with. And our budget is driven by a fixed tax base. And there is no deciding, well, this is our budget, here's what the people have to pony up. And Prop 2.5 guarantees we can't do that. We are restricted and we have to cut and work within that budget. And the school seems to have their approximately 2% average per year increase no matter what. And that's frustrating sometimes when we watch other town departments cut and cut and cut. Sometimes in the past it's been as much as 10% or 15%. Other towns are just told budgets are cut in departments. Just cut it. Figure it out. Because the school needs more. And it's frustrating. I get frustrated and other people get frustrated, and we hear about it often. Why is it so much? Why don't they make cuts and look at their budget and say, instead of saying this is what we want and this is our 2%, this is what the town can afford. We have our assessment by the state. It's $2.5 million less than we give you. The assessment's what the state says we can afford, and that's what we can afford. And the $2.5 million above that, this town can't afford, and it hurts this town every single year. And I'm not saying you should cut the $2.5 million for this town or the half that budget back, but I want to see it come down and slow down in growth. And maybe you could find a way to make some cuts and get some of that money back to the town. The towns need that money. We are struggling to replace fire equipment, police cruisers. We have short-staffed personnel in places. We can't do the programs we want in town for other stuff. We're held up by the school that nearly 60% of our budget. That means for every $6 the school gets, our police, our fire, our municipal buildings, our assessors, our DPW workers, everything else, our roads, our buildings, everything in this town gets $4, while the school gets $6. That's tough to choke down for most people. That's every town employee, every town structure, all of our utilities, all of our road repair, absolutely everything, all of our insurances, our retirement accounts, our cable access, absolutely everything we fund for $4. And in this school alone, that one facility, granted there's the Ruggles and the other facilities, but the school system, very limited structures, personnel, and everything compared to what the town has to run with. And you get $6 for every 4 we get. We manage on it. And I'm asking that you take a hard look at your budget and see where you could possibly cut. I don't know yet until I start to get into some of this stuff. And that's why I'm asking questions. Not to insult you, not to say you're ripping us off, but to say that we at the town are at a point every year where we get to the budget and we're scrounging to make things fit. And denying virtually last year, every single request for a purchase from every department last year was denied. Everything at town meeting. And how can you ask anyone to do that way? Everyone is behind in equipment. We've had to get the town clerk new software, new voting stuff. We have to get the police their tasers. They're expired. They're not repairable. Things like bulletproof vests have a shelf life, have to be replaced. There's certain things we have to do. Firefighter equipment has to be replaced. We literally, fire engine went down again. We have another engine out of service. It's getting replaced. It's coming. But it's being replaced right now temporarily by a 30-year-old fire truck. We don't have the newest and best. We are getting by on Band-Aids, and this is why we're asking about this. I'm not just trying to hit you with money, but I feel like the school never really understands the financial bind that the town is in. And yes, you go to town meeting, and the people assume, well, if our boards think it's okay, we're going to go ahead and pass this budget. And it's a shame they don't come out and listen to this, and they don't understand what this is. And it's a shame that it should come to this. I would like to see more cooperation. When our town takes a hit on budget, in years past when this town lost financing and lost a percentage of their budget, it would have been nice to the school cut back just like everybody else did instead of increase.
I've been on the committee for 12 years, and back in 2007, if you look at the history, 58 to 65% of the budgets, in the town for education. Over time, because of the way the shifting of the state has occurred, there's been adjustments that has happened to the town, and we have cut and continue to cut. And I know that I hear this every 2 or 3 years of, okay, the selectmen think that they, want to tell us how to run the budget. Now, what I'm trying to say by that is, for a body politic, we will continue to advocate what is best for kids. And at the same time, we take everything into consideration, along with the lack of funding on the state level. It has caused angst for 10 years for cities and towns throughout the Commonwealth to be able to nickel-dime their budgets. There are costs of capital costs that we have done ourselves. Do you remember we tried to get a technology bond? We wanted $2 million for technology in 2007, 8. The town said, no, we're not going to do an override. You do it yourself. Look what technology is today in 2019. So we had to. So what I'm trying to say is, yes, we make those adjustments. We work where we can. And it's not as simple to say that it's a 16% that is just overnight that we caused this problem. There's health insurance costs. There's special education costs. There's capital costs. The teachers, I will appreciate the teachers in the workforce. Several years ago, not only did they take zeros, they froze steps. So we all do those opportunities to decrease the budget, decrease assessments where we can, and at the same time, several years ago, we were the only school district out of 380 school districts that had the commissioner set our budget when we couldn't get 4 out of 5 towns back in 2009, 10, 11 a year was when we had. And what did the commissioner say? The commissioner said, you cut everything you did at the time, here's the budget. So we will work with the towns. We work with the budgets. The assessments, if we can lower it. Last year, I think it was 0.5 or 0.6%, the overall budget went up. This year, the operating budget is 2.8%, I believe, to go up. So over time, and the state, and I am going to fault the state, the inadequacy funding. It has pitted us for 10, 12 years. And then we have the 2.5. Then we have the 2.5 levy you have to worry about. You have no growth in towns. You have no additional monies. And you're right, you say, okay, do you want a school district that doesn't have the arts, the music, the programming, the AP, and the desired courses to not only have 330 kids coming from other school districts wanting to come to Quabbin? So that's our job, to advocate for the budget, efficiencies and cost, and to give it to the town. The town decides at the end of the day. I promise you that. But at the same time, with a committee of 15, when you see that, and you've been involved up there, we're a pretty competent board to work things out. We kick the tires. We ask for zero budgeting. We ask to justify every dollar. If I need an adjustment council because of the social emotional needs of children, and I see other things that are happening, I know the relationship we have with the police, and we have resource officers, we didn't have that years ago. Thank you for funding that position through the town. That might be another way to help. We could maybe somehow share that cost down the road. There's other ways to be creative, and we'll try that. So I do want to support, but I don't want to at the same time say 16% in 10 years, there it is. I'm not the numbers person, but I do know that our budget has been sustained between $31 and $35 million to keep a very good program, and we also have a lot of our costs going up. So if I can control costs, I will do it anywhere we can.
The 16% was actually in 8 years, because you did go through a 3-year recession. In '09, you took a $800,000 decrease in budget. In 2010, you had an additional $1 million decrease in budget. In 2011, you had a little over $1 million decrease in budget. In 2012, it started coming back up again, and from that point, it's climbed 16%. But you did demonstrate the ability to cut and the ability to recede with the town back then.
Bad years.
And they were bad years, and they were even worse for other town departments. Those are the years. That was the years that the town departments were asked to cut 10% across the board and more. So yes, we all recessed back then. But I'm saying since then, it has been a 16% increase in the next 8 years, which I don't think a 2% growth is unreasonable. I'm not saying it is, but it's just not the same kind of growth that we're getting in the town. When it comes down to 2% of your total budget, when the state is owning half of that, that means a 4% growth to us, where the town may be growing at 1.5%. And what I've always asked for, if the town's growing at 1.5%, I would rather see your budget grow 1.5% to 2% on our share, which would be half of that total, because your total budget, half is by the state. So when you say your budget's grown by 3%, that's a 6% assessment to the towns. So it's a little deceiving when you look at the numbers that way. The 16% growth means the towns have incurred a 32% budget growth over those same 8 years. Understand what I'm saying?
No, not
The
really.
state's funded the
You're
same,
not really-
the
not
state's
really
level
accurate.
funded pretty much over those years, so,
Well,
so
it
this,
Has decreased the.
I know, but it's-
56 to 50%, so it's not
The-
exactly.
yeah, the
it's easy
state
math
is-
that you say.
the state in 2000, I said the low point here, the state was 17,287,000, and now they propose 17,566, so they've decreased about, not quite 400,000. So they have a
Percentage
400,
is the
but,
percentage.
but I'm just saying, there's a lot to look at.
I think that
It's,
the discussion kind of made the points that each side has, and I appreciate both sides being able to have this discussion, because nothing happens without talking through it. Otherwise, you just build anger, resentment, you don't really go anywhere with it. So I can't thank you enough for taking the time to come out and talk to us, to explain from your side, your position with the information you were able to provide us at this meeting. I know a lot of this information has already been provided to the general public in different means and methods, different meetings. But as you know, you have a meeting and 40 people show up, but you got 3,000 people that can vote in town, we're barely touching the people. And then they come to us later and say, what's going on? Why is this happening? And we don't have those answers because, honestly, I'm probably in another meeting and not at your meeting. And so I'm missing some of this info, so I can't also provide as clear of an answer. You know, I could look at that and make similar statements, maybe say Greg made, but the truth is some of it might still be inaccurate because I don't have enough of that background info, or I don't have enough of the total effect. As he was talking about how the town was going on at the same time as that. I didn't move to town until 2012, so I'm not gonna tell you what was going down in 2008. You know, so some of that is, it's appreciated, and appreciated by me. As well, also you, Greg, participating and bringing up some thoughts that yourself, as well as I'm sure many other people in town have talked to you about, and you're kind of raising up some thoughts. I would like to continue to grow with this, but I can't let it continue to take over this meeting. So that's why I just wanted to say thank you very much for this. And maybe we can set up another time where we're not so busy with everything else to just talk more about it, see what we can do, how we can work the town side, the school side. Maybe we can set up a meeting where it's mostly that's the agenda item, so we can really get into some of this. And we'll set up kind of maybe some specific talks so that people can come prepared with things, so you're not surprised when you're like, oh, what about this? And you're like, I wish I had that info with me today. You know, if we can do that, that'll help us kind of continue to figure out where these, either the gaps in knowledge of the people wondering what's going on, or the gaps in just, oh, we missed that. Now we see, we could do this, or, so I'd like to further this in a little further down the road if we're okay with that.
Yeah, and I don't want to make it seem as though we're trying to tell you how to do your budget, because believe me, we do, I'm just saying, we hear the same concerns from departments that want things, and everybody makes their requests, and then you hear from town employees, and you hear from town citizens, well, why don't they get this, or why can't they have it, or why is someone getting this?
Absolutely.
And everybody has their comments and opinions, and we know why, you know, most of that's on Andrew's shoulders, that's figured this out, and what's gonna be allocated where, when, and why, and trying to keep capital purchases is our biggest challenge. You know, the capital purchases we need to make and fitting them within our balling ability is difficult. And I know it's difficult.
Before we completely close the topic, I do know we have a selectman from another town here. I thought you tried to raise your hand earlier. Are you up? You got nothing? Good enough. I mean, when someone comes from another town, you appreciate it. You don't want to not give them a chance to speak if there was a reason he came here. So, thank you. Sam, if you're gonna say something, it has to be something
On
succinct, on point, and not already said tonight.
Are you trying to tell me what I need to speak about?
I'm asking
Giving
if
you
what
a
I
minute to
just
figure
said
it
is
out.
what you can do,
No.
I'll give you the floor.
What I'm saying, if you let me speak, is that, first of all, I want to say that the preparation for the school was wonderful, and it was clear, and it was more clear than I've had ever heard.
Yes.
And I liked the conversation from the selectmen. However, Barry is in a unique position. I don't know about other towns, but Barry doesn't have a bond rating. Now, Barry is a business. It's basic to have a bond rating in a business. Barry is bleeding because they don't have a bond rating, and they don't have a bond rating because they're bleeding. Now, at the last meeting, there was discussions about taxes going up and taxes going down, and how high they are, and how high they were, and where they're going. And Selectman Urban, Chairman Urban, said, "Oh, but our tax rate went down last year." And then someone from the group here said, "Yes, but the assessments went up."
Yep.
So in other words, we were just trying to placate society, or placate the people in the meeting, and placate the people in television land to tell them that they're right, and you try to do your best. We shouldn't have to be in a town that is somewhat cleverly deceptive by lowering the rate, increasing the assessments so that maybe people might not get it.
That's statewide.
Well,
The statewide, there was a push to increase the assessment
I'm not
statewide.
saying-
Every town, municipality, and district
I'm
had that feeling and felt it, and it's still going on.
I'm not saying, wait a minute, I'm not finished. I'm not saying that,
Whether it was an intent to manipulate or it was just
it's just
assessments
uncomfortable to-
were
it's
not
uncomfortable to-
raised appropriately over the years and they recognized it and they said, quit devaluing the assessment because it's reducing the state revenue. So the state, whether it was in writing or they just made the press, they wanted you to look at it and be more accurate and provide what they thought were accurate assessments. And I think many towns realized they had to catch up. So you're seeing some of these assessments go up. Your local revenues may not change much. Your local budgets may not change a lot. So all of a sudden it looks like your tax rate went down a little. It was not to manipulate you to make it look like, look what we did to lower your tax rate. It just, as the timeline goes, and we had a similar letter from Hubbardston about the whole assessment process where not all 5 towns finished their assessment at the same time. So one year, all of a sudden, it looks like Barry's got a 5 to 8% increase. Why? Because we just reassessed our property. Next year, Hubbardston goes. Our assessment drops from the 8% down to 3%, and Hubbardston jumps up to 10% because the assessment made it look different. It's a timeline issue that makes these numbers look bad, and that's why you can't just look at one spot and call that one moment in time something to rely on. You've got to look at over the time, or you're not going to see it appropriately. And the reason I made that comment at the last meeting about our tax rate went down was to be specifically sarcastic about how looking at your tax rate is not really paying attention to your expenditure and revenue balance. It means nothing about your expenditures and revenues, your tax rate. And so I was just trying to make that point.
well, it didn't come through necessarily that
Well,
way.
that's why I'm taking a moment to try to
Only
clarify.
because-
If I could take a minute to oversimplify that.
Override taxes, but bottom line, Barry still does not have a bond
That has nothing to do with the agenda item
rating.
again.
No, it doesn't.
Then why did you bring it up? I
We're
just
still-
asked you, can you be on
We're
point about the
still- We're
agenda?
still having that difficulty, a fiscal difficulty.
Again,
As a town.
thank you. I appreciate it. We are working on the bond rating. It has nothing to do with what the school committee's been doing to us or the school budget has been doing to us for the last 5 years. You don't lose your bond rating because the school budget ruined your town. There's many other things that led to that. We're working on it, and I believe we're maybe a year or 2 away from being in a situation where we can actually request a bond rating and be in a situation where we can expect a good one. But it takes time to rebuild that before you go to them and say, please give me a bond rating, or you're pretty much going in and saying, yeah, you get 15% interest on everything you borrow, but you got a rating. And you don't want to start there because it takes longer to dig out of that than to wait till you're right and then ask. So that's what we're doing. A program is happening, but it's not something we can advertise because time has to prove itself out. And until we prove it out, it wouldn't be worth saying, oh yeah, we expect next December. Because if something messes up, the last thing I want to tell you is, yeah, we screwed up, so let's push it to July. And then you kick me out of office and I go home and say I tried. If you get something quick, otherwise I really need to go to the next agenda item.
I was just gonna say that what people need to understand general about our budget is what we get for taxes for revenues is based on our need. And we do have a rough estimate of where the budget's gonna be, and then we have to assess taxes to cover those liabilities. Historically, everybody looks at their tax assessment on a home and says, oh, wow, my house is worth more than that. And it's always been that way, and they're trying to bring those values into realistic values. So that's why the assessments have gone up. The state wants the real number from the town, which means your tax rate will go down, because if they're gonna call your house 200,000, not 150, then we don't need a 20% tax rate, we need a 15. And that's all that is. It's not a manipulation. It's the fact is we have to have a target number. We're only allowed to tax to get to that number, projected budget. We can't overtax to make a surplus. We're not allowed to do that. So what we tax And what we set the rate at to achieve is our targeted budget area. We can't just say we're gonna get this amount of money this year and go for more. It doesn't work that way. So the assessments are trying to make houses valuation a realistic number. So if your house valuation is 200, you'd expect to put it in the market and sell it for 200. Where years ago, that was not the case. That's why the values went up.
Mary Jane?
1 minute. Mr. Bonfrey, his idea on sharing the school with the police department budget, maybe the fire department can be put into the budget too, we could think about that also.
Well, what I meant by that was the resource officer.
Yes.
The resource officer.
police,
We don't have a
police.
fire person in the building as such as we would have the resource officer.
Okay.
But again, thank you to the selectmen and to the financed it for 2 years. And so we put a memorandum of understanding together, and we're evaluating the program, and we're grateful that we had that.
She might not understand what the officer does. That's one officer assigned to the school that is in the
We
school.
could perhaps have the taxpayers not pay for that part of it, the school could pay for that part of it, no?
You could, but it's the same thing. We just pay the school back.
Or we be creative, and as we're trying to do, we are really trying to be creative, and not only looking at buildings, the utilization of buildings, and how we can do things. Again, look at New Braintree and Hardwick, they're sharing the police department. You've got shared services, we believe in that, I want to see more of that stuff. The capital sharing, why can't we have plumbers, steam fitters, HC folks together in towns and throughout the Commonwealth? There is equipment, we've worked with other districts to try to do that. So we all are trying various ways.
Thank you.
Because we will, lastly, I don't want to be in a downward spiral of a community. We have a very good community here. People step up, they support the fire, the police, the town, the roads. But at the same time, you have the state's lack of funding of there, Chapter 71, Chapter 70, you got the opiate crisis, you got health, you got all this piece going on in this Commonwealth with only so much money in the pie. And so that's why we will try to do other ways. So we're thankful for the cost, and I'm not speaking for full committee of 15, but we're certainly willing to look at other ways of being creative and financing to work together.
The taxpayer, appreciate it, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much again, I appreciate it.
I like the presentation.
Yes. Definitely informative for me, so.
Yes. I might need a piece of fudge, damn it. You guys missing out on it, telling you.
Yeah, it's a lifestyle choice. Sugar is I stay away from it.
Me too, but once in a while.
I already cheated a couple days ago. It's like I can't. Every day could be a cheat, and therefore I'm just not.
I haven't in weeks, so I'm due a couple. It's good.
All right. Before I just randomly choose an agenda item on this list, is there a specific agenda item that people in this room are here for? Yes, Ralph?
Yeah, I'm wondering what's going on with the marijuana and the town water.
Okay, then.
Same.
Dang. The agent? You're gonna get appointed.
I was interested in how you're gonna name the names and when we, so if you're naming them individually, or if you're waiting for quorum.
I believe right now we're naming them as we receive them, and when we reach a quorum, then you guys can start. But we could wait till we at least have enough applications to meet the quorum before we officially vote on them. Because it's all the same at that point. You really can't do anything until there's a quorum.
That's what I was asking.
So that's a good question. Do you think it matters on the, what's that? I forget, the age-friendly committee? Should we appoint as we receive, or wait till at least we get enough applications for a quorum and then review and appoint at one time?
I think we should if they're here, especially, rather than trying to get everybody and notify everybody, we've got to do it on a certain night. Be nice if they can attend and appoint as we receive them, so we don't have to have
Okay.
them come back and.
We'll do it
try
as
to
we go.
line them all up.
So your name's on the list tonight, so we'll be voting on you this evening. at some
There are
point.
2 names on the list.
Yes.
Does the
I don't
other-
see him here.
Well, I don't think he knew he needed to be here.
He doesn't need
He
to
doesn't
be.
have to, we can appoint them both.
You don't have to be here. We'll appoint it. They'll contact you, let you know, and then you can go through the town clerk process.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pat. Appreciate you coming out. Yes, Ralph?
I have one more question. The correspondence, resignations of?
Yes.
All those names. What are they resigning from?
Okay, I can give you a quick update. Martha and Ed are resigning from the Ware Rivershed Association Committee?
Ware River Watershed.
Ware River Watershed,
The letters are in there.
yeah, something related to protecting the watershed. Dennis is the Conservation Commission. And each of them put in some level of explanation or reason. Most of it just seems to be more of a balance of work-life balance and opportunities for others is what it, generally these comments seem to have come back on with their resignation letters or emails that we received. So let's go to the marijuana bylaw, which was more specific to the general bylaw that the Board of Selectmen was proposing for the warrant. And then we'll go to the town meeting warrant and address those two at once, and then hopefully that'll hit most of the people. Are you here for a specific item, sir, or just?
No.
Okay, perfect, Randy. I just wanted to double check again.
If Will's here for public comment, I think you said, you want to do that quickly?
Are you here for public comment?
Yes.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Will.
All right, thank you.
Every time you listen to that, it's something different.
You can come up if you want.
Yeah, come up, sit up, stand up, or sit back. Use your comfort
Will
level.
Reed Goss, former town employee.
Yes.
I want to start, I got two things.
Okay.
And the first one I want to start is say thanks to the Barry Fire Association for, getting a little worked up,
Don't worry.
for supporting my family.
If need continues, I'm sure they'll do more, but
Yes.
know that.
And so as a representative, thank you. Next, I would like to thank members of the Barry Police Association, those who voted to support my family as well, and also the town of Barry, because I never had a chance to say thank you for allowing me to serve the town for 10 years. I'll make it quick. I wrote everything down so I can get through it quickly. I'm here to ask the select board for their assistance. Since leaving the town, I've been required, since leaving the town, I've attended court for the town of Barry several times, approximately 10 times. That's not a solid number.
Follow up on previous.
On previous cases,
Okay.
yeah, so
All right.
cases, they're Barry cases. And to help you better explain, I'm gonna just, this is a summons. What you receive to let you know when you have to show up to court. It has the case, your name. In bold here, it says, you must appear at this court address on the date and time specified herein. And it goes on to say, you are hereby ordered to appear in this court on the appearance date noted above to give evidence and testify on behalf of the Commonwealth in the matter described above, and to appear from time to time, day to day thereafter. Warning to witness, failure to appear in accordance with the summons may result in the issuance of a warrant for your arrest. It also adds, if you have any questions, please contact the district attorney. It gives a number, even has it in Spanish. And at the bottom is the return of service, which is stamped by a judge and the clerk magistrate of the East Brookfield District Court. And that indicates whether someone's been served or not. That goes back to the district attorney so they know if they've been served. So out of those 10 cases, there's been one case that I've been summoned to on 3 occasions. Once in January, once in March, and once in last Thursday in May. Also summoned was a civilian witness who is also a town resident. And also summons was Deputy Chief Suborn of the Barry Police Department. Now the civilian witness, has taken time off of their work to attend these cases. I have also taken my own time to attend these cases as I'm not getting reimbursed for it. The one person who is getting reimbursed, or who is receiving compensation to go to these, did not show for the January case without a call or an explanation to the district attorney. They did not respond to the March summons. Same no call, no explanation, and they did not respond last Thursday. No call, no explanation. Like I said, I'm not being compensated for this. Neither is the civilian witness, who is actually losing money because they're not going to work. I think the town should care because the district attorney stands up each time in court and says, this individual was summoned, but they have not responded. We have not had contact with them. So it gives a very bad perception of the town of Barry and the town of Barry Police Department and that individual. I'm not here to ask the town to pay me for the court cases. I don't have interest for that. What's important to me is time.
Take a minute, it's all right.
It's important for me, based on my current situation. I'm basically acting as a single father of 2 3-year-old twins at home, while my wife is living in a hospital. I'm sorry. With an 18-month-old. So it's this situation has split our family apart. I'm not asking for an apology. I don't care why they didn't show up. I only ask that the town extend the courtesy to me to make sure that they show up at all summonses. I am going to continue to fulfill my duty without any further complaint. I'm going to go to these cases. I don't want to discuss this any further with anyone. I don't want to be contacted regarding this matter. I just want it to be rectified. So that's it. Hopefully I explained that in a way where you don't need to ask questions. If you had any questions, I'd certainly be open to answer anything right now. But
Is that one particular case been extended those 3 times because of the no-show, or is it just 3
it was
hearings?
extended in January because of the no-show. It was extended in, that actually does bring up another point for me. It was extended in March because of the no-show. It was finally dismissed on this last case by the judge when the district attorney requested that the case be attempted to be moved forward, and the defense attorney said that they needed the witness there. The judge dismissed it. The other thing was the case was 3 years old, so the town had a lot invested in this case. But that's not my problem, and that's not what I'm concerned with. I just want to make sure that my time is utilized appropriately. Like I said, I'm not asking for compensation at this point. I don't want compensation, and I would reject it. Just extend me the courtesy of showing up and allowing me to have the one thing that I do need, which is time.
Understood.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for taking the time to let us know. We'll get back to the marijuana bylaw, general bylaw. I believe the only thing in the general bylaw we were discussing was, am I correct, it was the whole chasing complaints process, and I believe there were some comments, some recommendations from the review committee. Am I correct? That's what this was about, that one
The odor.
revision that,
The odor. Yeah.
the odor. And I'm just trying to remember
Where it is at. I'm looking.
outside of the other recommendations, I believe that was the only one that we didn't outright accept from the review committee. And we were looking to just change some of the wording, but the general intent, I think, was still in place. Where did we put that paragraph?
Right here. 3 pages from the back of top section B. Cannabis outdoor cultivations will implement industry best practices to eliminate any noticeable trace cannabis odor. Detected beyond the appropriate protocol. It's been changed. The Board of Selectmen will investigate complaints as they deem appropriate and follow up with the business owner regarding any and all complaints received. The Board of Selectmen may involve outside agencies as they see appropriate in investigation. So we've gone from 5 complaints to TRIP, a mandatory metering of the odors, to investigating each complaint, probably in person by our town administrator. And if he does think there's an odor, we'll figure out, we talk about maybe having multiple persons go out and visit and see if we need to go into some sort of analysis of the air quality. But we're trying to make a reasonable approach of it instead of saying 5, because 5 doesn't take, that one downwind neighbor that's always getting odor doesn't get a say. So, identifying any complaint, investigating on our own is more reasonable, I think, than trying to say 5. And I like how it's written now.
I also think if we try to put a timeline on a response time, it doesn't necessarily help either, because an odor complaint could be there and then disappear in a half hour, depending on the way the wind blows. So when we started thinking about it, we had to be careful on how overly regulated we made the bylaw, because it doesn't really allow for you to take the complaint and the seriousness of it into account based on an automatic this or an automatic that, or we will respond or we won't respond, or it takes 5 people to say it or it takes 1 person to say it. Each complaint itself is going to warrant an initial, whether it's a conversation with the owner, or a conversation with the original complainant to clarify what the complaint was, where it lasted, is it still going on. In other words, we might get a complaint and 3 hours later we reach out to them and they say, I don't smell it anymore, I don't know. But I'm positive it was coming from there. And they may be right. Or it could be somebody else being really bad and doing something they shouldn't be doing somewhere else in the neighborhood, and that person smelled it. So it's hard to regulate that in a bylaw, how to follow that up. So I think this is how we wanted to do it, and we thought that the Board of Selectmen could work into more policies to identify any standards that may have to apply to how we respond. But this is more just saying that we acknowledge it and we will respond. And it's pretty much allowing the board, not an individual, to determine how to respond to each complaint based on how the complaint is presented. That's my opinion, and I think that's generally what we were talking about, is because each time we brought something up, somebody easily brought a counter argument saying why that wouldn't be a good idea. And we just realized you can't put it in a bylaw to that degree. You just gotta say, the Board of Selectmen is who you send the complaints to,
We'll investigate it.
and we'll work with whoever we think we need to follow up on the complaint. So we might call the police depending on, or we might call a third-party agency with the right little meter to go sniff the air and tell us if it's got a certain parts per million that meets some state or federal or non-sanctioned regulatory authority that we're not ready to sanction because it's too new to the industry, but you know what I mean.
Board of Health wasn't interested in it either.
That was the other part. The Board of Health also wasn't interested in chasing something like this because it could be just that. Every time, by the time they get the complaint, by the time they get out there, they're chasing ghosts. And then...
And it's training and equipment.
And it creates a bad history with the person making the complaint. Because if it ends up turning out to be a ghost because we don't show up for 2 hours, 4 hours, 6 hours, or a day, depending on how quickly the complaint gets to us and then the third party, Now the complainant starts to look like they're just saying stuff that isn't real, and it may have been too real at the time the complaint happened, but we couldn't get out there timely to address it. So I think writing a certain bylaw that created certain rigid guidelines wouldn't help either the business or the neighbor. It may cause one or the other to actually look worse than they actually are. So we thought, write it up, tell us what the problem is, and we'll address it. Ralph?
I have 3 quick things.
Yeah.
First is voter of town, what you just read, I think it's totally acceptable, and I think that works. 2, as chairman of the committee, the intent was to not have anything that could be an opinion-based thing. So we were trying to give you guys something that was measurable, and we also wanted to, by saying, hey, 5 votes or 5 complaints, was to make it so one person couldn't just clog up your system.
Yeah.
So that was just the intent based on that. The third thing is going to be, okay, so the Board of Selectmen, you guys are going to be regulating the complaints. Then that has to come out of the Board of Selectmen's version, because the Board of Selectmen is trying to keep that, the planning board, sorry, is trying to keep that in their zoning bylaw. So the way it's going right now is you guys are saying, okay, come to us, and the planning board is saying, okay, come to us. And
We've said this right along.
What's that?
We've said this right along. I don't like the same things in the 2 bylaws. But
Yeah, so I just want to make that aware. And I don't know if that's something that has come up on the town floor, or if there's a way to get those guys to understand that it comes under your jurisdiction and not theirs before it goes to the town floor. I just thought it should be brought up to you guys.
proposed
It's a good
amendments.
question, because you could look at different examples as to why each board may believe that it would be their jurisdiction.
Amendments can be
For
proposed.
mini site assignment type, special permit granting type things, planning board, they are usually the ones, and it falls under the zoning enforcement officer, which is our building commissioner, who kind of works under that authority. But in this regard, it's more license, which is much more like alcohol, which is Board of Selectmen. And there's almost a point where I'm sitting here saying shame on the state, because they set this up. You know, they set up the host community agreement, put it in the Board of Selectmen's world. It's a de facto licensing process. And then they said, planning board, and you do your regulations too. And then the state will do regulations, and we all gotta hope that we're not crossing over each other. And the likelihood is we're all crossing over each other, and we're all gonna get mad at each other at some point.
Yeah.
But that's because the state's really paying attention to the regulations and how they affect the people, the boots on the ground. Or I could say more and I won't. MJ?
I just want to say that this is going to affect my neighborhood on Trafalgar Square, the railroad tracks, Trifalo and Iron Jolie. When you're making rules and regulations as far as air and the winds coming, however they may come, I'm going to be affected. I'm going to be talking to you.
No.
It's a
When you're affected, let us
It's a
know.
cultivation.
You live way too far away.
If she's affected, just let us know, Mary.
Okay, I'm not going to.
If you're affected, just let us know.
Okay, I have no words.
There's rules and regs in the zoning and the licensing. If you're affected, you let us know. If it's validated, we will have to respond, and they will have to respond to us. So, I hear you. There's a potential. Let's just cross our fingers it doesn't become an issue. But if it does, it does. Claire?
Can't you both, planning board and board of selectmen, work together on it?
I tried for a year and a half.
Why can't it be in both, and you both in each one say, board of selectmen and planning board?
Because
Will answer.
these 2 methods are completely different. They don't mesh at all, these 2 methods of odor
But-
detection.
Here's my
we discussed it.
thought, Claire, just to better explain. The planning board's role usually is identifying what's necessary to build something. Once it's built, they walk away. They no longer regulate the business moving forward. That either comes out of the building department the inspector's office as a zoning enforcement, or it comes from the Board of Health, or it comes from the Board of Selectmen, because at that point, you're talking about the operation of a business. Unless they are truly going outside of the use, in other words, they're building buildings they're not allowed to build, they're using a building in a manner they're not allowed to build, they were not allowed under special permit granting authority, it's not something that normally would be a planning board thing at all. It was built according to what they said. Now it's an operating thing, and it generally would fall under the licensing. And if it's not the Board of Selectmen, it's the state that's getting involved with the inspections and saying, are you following the rules and the guidelines? And half of our smell stuff, if I'm correct, is still in the state regs. So we're duplicating half of that, and it's gonna be under the jurisdiction of the state as much as it is us. It's almost like alcohol.
So why?
A complaint against an alcohol, like a package store, it goes to the state. And then the state tells the Board of Selectmen, there's a complaint against this person's license.
So why is it in there at all?
Public
The
protection.
state is gonna,
Public protection.
Because we still feel that somebody locally should be willing to answer to the local community if they say there's a complaint and act on it. Because we can help them either deal with us or help them understand the method of submitting a complaint to the state against the license. So they're not alone. But I don't understand why both boards have to do it, and I don't understand why the planning board feels like they have to be the one to do it. Just like I didn't understand why they felt like they had to be the one to put limits on permits when we already said we're putting limits on licenses, and either one is the limit. You can't do it without a permit, and you can't do it without a license. We talked about it from the very beginning. But that's how they feel. And I recognize they're saying it's because it's harder to change the bylaw as a zoning bylaw than a general bylaw, so if we have it as permits, it's gonna be harder to increase the number of allowable permits versus the allowable license. Unless the governor changes the law, and it's all 50% majority and it doesn't matter anymore. Which I find interesting, because it was members of the planning board told me that they supported that. 50% majority on getting a zoning law approved versus the current 2/3 requirement. Yes, Josh?
I'm just curious.
Joshua,
whether
I'm sorry.
The regulations that the planning board is considering, do you know if their special permits are for a fixed period of time? So the one time that the planning board does do this sort of regulatory behavior is when the permits have a limited life. And then they need to periodically, you need to come back and get a new special permit. And that's where, at that time, they typically do enforcement, listen to public comment, and decide, are you playing by the rules? So it's a
I haven't
totally
read
different-
something like that. The only time I've seen that was in the solar bylaw, because they were concerned about the 20-year lifespan and what are you gonna do with the mess you left behind.
Like kennel permits, for example. So when the planning
Okay.
board issues a kennel permit, that's not forever.
With like a 5 or a 10
Yeah,
year, and then
there's
come back and
periods of
let's.
time, and then they have to come back and get re-permitted.
I haven't read that in their bylaw, but maybe I read past it, just not seeing
If
it.
they did that,
I
it would
didn't
make
see it.
sense to me,
Yeah.
that they would be asking for, that they would be someone that you'd want to come back to, so that when it came time for them to decide if they're going to re-up the permits. But if they're not asking for that, then I think you're probably right. It doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, because what are they going to do? They already issued the permit.
Because there's no, yeah, I don't
It's
recall.
only one time, because typically I think more of the planning board revolving ones are typically around gravel operations and stuff like that, to make sure that gravel pits are within conformity of what's allowed by special permit
Gravel
versus,
pit, solar, we did.
right, versus, something that might expand in scope and then re-upping that permit versus something like this where it's, once it's built, the special permit's been granted. Basically, the special permit process gives you the ability to come in and kind of more explain what in detail and give exceptions to things that might have been cited in the permit or in the bylaw.
Okay.
think you put it a good way when you said that they're a planning board. They're to help plan the construction of something. They're not an overseeing board or a regulating board.
Not general.
It is the planning board. The overseeing and regulating is done by different governing bodies that are assigned to do it. It's not the general role of the planning board.
And I think to better clarify my answer to your question, Claire, about the Board of Selectmen, and Planning Board working together on this is members of each board honestly have just differing opinions on the jurisdiction of each board. And I think we've reached a point where both boards now feel like the other one's trying to encroach and push across this line between the two. But I don't think anybody's individually, at least I don't feel this way. I don't think there's anybody on the planning board that is doing things just because they want to upset the Board of Selectmen or members of the Board of Selectmen, or they want to push past a line that they believe exists. I think they feel like they're just trying to push up to the line that exists, and that's just where they feel their line exists. So I'm just saying, I disagree with it, but I have to accept that they're just as justified as I am to have their opinion in how they believe this works. I'm frustrated. I think we could find better balance along the way.
There's a lack of clarity from the state, which leads both parties to believe.
There's lack of clarity from the state, but also, and I'm not knocking the planning board, it's almost every town does this. You go and you rate any other town you can and say, what did you create? What type of bylaw did you have? And then you try to modify it to yours. But there are other towns out there that may not have reflected the same population disparity in this town, that created a bylaw that showed a lot of strength and nearly a complete restriction of it without restricting it.
That's what the planning board.
But that may not have been what that town, with the 60-40 recreational vote and the 55-45 town meeting vote to not prohibit, whatever that vote ended up.
About that.
It just shows you we're either even or more pro than negative with marijuana as an industry. Not to say have it next door. I know that when somebody votes at the polls, they're not necessarily sitting there imagining cultivation site next to their house. They're just saying that I don't see a problem with somebody being able to go buy it and use it respectfully in their own home or something like that, and I'm not going to make an issue. So I think when we refer to those votes, it's a little deceiving to identify a 60-40% and what does that mean to what people think about a zoning bylaw. But the point is, I'm just saying this town is as close as you can get to right down the middle split based on any voting history we have. If that's the case, I feel like we are more restrictive than the average zoning bylaw that has been addressed on marijuana than I've seen across the state. Without flat out saying no, I haven't seen anything more restrictive than what I've seen with the zoning bylaw. There's one thing to do special permit granting authority where you say there are going to be some things we want to see and we're going to have comment on, but then add on to it prescribed restrictions and offsets that are beyond what the special permit granting authority would be reviewing anyway. In other words, you boxed it in and then you added another box around it. That's how I perceive the way they built this zoning bylaw. So that frustrated me. That's my personal opinion. That's my political view is don't overregulate. Don't box things out. Learn to work with. The zoning bylaw did very little in that, in my opinion, and I was frustrated because I thought there were a lot of people, every time I went to the meeting, the public meetings that I went to, I stopped going in the last 6 months because I kind of backed off when we had the last special town meeting. I was like, that's your thing, I know my input's no longer being beneficial or useful, so I stopped going. But up until then, everybody in the room was showing some type of questions about the 500-foot setbacks or the 100-foot setbacks, or in the beginning, the 1,000 feet from a well. and we couldn't even figure out why they wanted that, but somebody said they wanted it because of some potential something. I couldn't recall what it was. I'm not saying it wasn't justified from their perspective, please. I'm not trying to belittle them, but I'm just saying it was extremely over-regulated from my position. I tried to work with them. They did what they did because they're the planning board. That's their thing. So I am no longer telling them what they should or shouldn't. I'm not even asking them to modify their, other than I asked them to take the number of permits off, because we've already had it in the general bylaw. And that was the one consideration I asked, and they weren't willing to give it. By the way, it would have passed at special town meeting had they given that consideration. There's only so far you can go. They're your elected planning board. I can ask, but I mean, they were elected to create this bylaw and put it before the town and make recommendations and then enforce that bylaw once it goes into place. So I've said my piece. I'm not going to try to ask them to do anything. They've already set their mind. They know what they want to do. Just sec Joshua.
So
Tom.
it would be prudent to have the Board of Health, because it does fall under their scope. It definitely doesn't fall under the planning board's regulations, in my opinion.
The odor?
What's that?
The odor follower?
Yeah. I mean, I know they don't want to, but under I was just reading some.
Board of Health is all of your air pollutant.
Yeah.
Whatever it is, that's their
Mass
jurisdiction.
DEP kind of portal, Mass EPA, or EPA portal.
Completely agree.
It seems like it would be prudent, instead of maybe absorbing that responsibility on your shoulders, and Andrew's, it seems like particularly.
So like a buffer.
What it comes down to is they send it to us and we send it to the Board of Health anyway. It's just not in the bylaw mandating the Board of Health to respond to it.
Just come to us.
But if we
and
send
say-
something to the Board of Health because we can't do more than the sniff test to prove something, then they've got to figure out what to do. Because it's a legitimate claim that comes to them, it falls under air pollution, and it becomes something that, just like you said, interpreted, they'll have to figure out how they got to respond.
And it addresses our concern for false complaints as well. Someone who just doesn't like marijuana and wants to make false complaints all the time, gives us the opportunity to say this is not warranted and not waste the Board of Health's time.
It'd be great not to waste your time, though, with unwarranted complaints when you can have a clerk. Just.
It would probably be a designee.
I don't
a
disagree,
designee of
Tom,
ours.
but this is another
I'm just
working
raising-
with other boards and trying to make it work so that it's not, let's push something on somebody else that doesn't want it.
Totally agree. I'm just suggesting that if there was a way to have the Board of Health do that, it would help facilitate the bridge between the planning boards. So on a topic like this, it may not feel like that tug in either direction thing. With something like this that has an impact that is only going to strain the members of this board and the administrative staff. That's my opinion.
You did just see the Game of Thrones finale,
I
right?
did,
Nuts.
but I thought,
I don't
We're
anticipate a lot of
about
complaints.
through season
Nice.
7 or whatever. Go ahead, Joshua.
If there's something specific in the proposed zoning bylaw that you as a citizen think should be changed, you do have the power to make an amendment on the floor of town meeting. That's something you could do.
And then the town votes on whether or not that amendment will be applied to it. So
Right.
it's very simple. If somebody wanted to say, they'll take our odor investigation off and say, I want to propose an amendment to the selectmen's bylaw, Part 3, Section 2, Line D, we're going to take out this portion. Then they could debate it and the town would vote. Do we make that modification to this bylaw? And if the town says it's made, then that's out. And they could do the same to the planning board's bylaw. They could say.
There's a method.
My point is that when two town boards have difficulty coming to agreement, the very best place you can resolve that is at town meeting.
Yeah, on the floor.
That's what town meeting is for. So if you have inconsistent warrant articles and you want to make them consistent, town meeting amendments are a great way to do that. Because you can get up and make your case, the town will decide. They make their case, they may make a different amendment, the town will decide. And amendments are simple majority rule even on a 2/3 zoning bylaw.
majority rule
You need
to
a-
amend
Amend the-
Exactly.
that which will then be voted on the 2/3 zoning.
Exactly.
Okay, I got
It's
you.
a lot easier than placing a full new article on, like we have 3 different versions of the planning board's bylaw. That's a challenge to go through 3.
Well, it's
I think
3
it's-
different zoning bylaws.
Right.
2 are planning board related, and 1 is an independent citizen that I believe followed a little bit more of the recommendation of the review committee. Still, I think they came a little closer to the original planning board one, but we do have currently 2 citizens petitions, and then the 1 planning board warrant request that came when the warrant was opened and closed. The 2 citizen petitions we're not allowed to deny, and we weren't gonna deny the planning boards either, just because. So, we have 3 zoning bylaws currently on the warrant. My understanding, and this is without verifying it myself, is 2 of them are generally the planning board. 1 may have gone through the citizens petition because they actually felt that the Board of Selectmen would not allow the planning board to put their own zoning bylaw on the warrant. So they went through the citizens petition based on the draft that was presented at special town meeting, just to make sure they had it. But in the meantime, they may still be working on revising that, cleaning it up, and maybe incorporating a few more comments that either came from the review committee that will be the planning board's one, the one that wasn't citizens petition. At that point then, I believe if it comes to the town meeting, the planning board would be the one to step up and say, the member, the actual citizen that got the signatures that's on the planning board would step up and say, I would like to table this or remove this, and then focus on the one that the planning board finished. And this is what they want to present to the town. And then what we're dealing with really are 2 separate ones. One that's a citizen's petition and one that's the planning board's. And that, in my opinion, is the best circumstance we're gonna get. The worst circumstance is we actually still end up with 3.
One of the things that I'm working on right now is to basically take the differences between those 2 bylaws, so that way when the planning board is under consideration, somebody that represents the other side can make the amendment to the planning board's bylaw. And those differences can be hashed out on town meeting floor rather than waiting for one to be defeated to then hopefully the second one get passed. So that way.
Did you put
Hopefully
in the
they have to
budget a buffet to be delivered at 10 p.m.? Because the one thing with this, I am expecting, if there is expected to be modifications and things on the town floor, is it's not gonna happen quickly. Not unless you get lucky and someone has a very clear, well-written, pre-written motion to revise a specific paragraph and section that the town can follow. Or they're not gonna know where it's at, how it's affecting everything else, and then it's gonna add more debate and more debate.
And maybe handouts.
So, bring a lunch bag, no chips, too loud, soft, mushy things, please.
Like caramels?
Those will work. Please forgive my sarcasm. Yes, Earl.
What order is the warrant gonna go in?
Planning boards, the planning board citizen petition, and then the other citizens petition.
And that is done in that order because who? Why?
Planning board, we put the town department first. That was the order in which we received the citizens petition.
So you're recommending, based on how we received it, determines how it goes on the warrant. Is there any regulation result, or is that just?
It's at the
when I got
discretion.
it?
It's at the discretion of the board of selectmen to determine it, but out of a practical matter, that would be the most fair way of regulating that.
Okay. Sam?
Where is the school budget going to be placed on the warrant?
Somewhere in the, just after the omnibus budget, before the enterprise budgets, or vice versa?
As part of the omnibus budget. Article 11.
But that's voted separately, that line, right? Not the
Right,
entire
you basically
article.
do it, when you're on Article 11, it's the general fund. You know, there's different motions for each.
Okay.
The suggestion he was making, like last week, was that we lose a lot of people at our town meeting often after the school votes their budget. Maybe we should slide their budget back further and keep our quorum
Yeah.
up at our town meeting.
I gotcha. Maybe we will do that. Move the entire budget to the end of the meeting. If you're really interested, then stick around. Yes, Mary Jane?
Did you mean that?
I mean to consider it, but I'm not necessarily saying it's a final decision. Because we do see that the minute the budget's voted, 20% of the room leaves.
I just spoke to them outside. I want to know if my 35 can be pulled forward, or I like the idea of you waiting for the budget last, and then somebody at least hears me.
I gotcha.
that People don't move to,
I believe we can look at that and try to accommodate something.
I don't have a problem with that.
Ralph?
Oh God, can I put me on the spot?
Mr. Rogers?
Oh, jeez, lost it, sorry.
senior woman, that's okay.
Yeah,
We all have them.
Oh, great hair.
Did I miss another hand over here?
Was gonna just, if you're thinking about moving the budget to the end, I'd suggest you think about two things. One is that I don't think that's ever happened before, and there is a certain value in following the traditions of town meeting that people are accustomed to. The other thing I'd point out is that quorum is something you should be considering. And you don't want to get yourself into a situation where someone calls for a count of quorum and we actually can't pass the budget and you have to have another town meeting, extension of the town meeting, it's a pain in the neck. So.
Quorum is based on what for an annual town meeting? Is it different than a special town meeting?
It is different, yeah.
Because I know the special town meeting was like 50 or
It's 50,
51.
and I think quorum is 100 for, it's a fixed number, and you don't automatically stop the meeting if it drops below that unless someone makes a motion to do the count, but if they do, then you do the count, and if you don't have quorum, you gotta stop. The only motion that would then be in order is a motion to adjourn to a later time. So, worst case scenario, you lose quorum and you can't deal with some, relatively minor warrant articles, but you can't deal with your budget, that's a real big pain in the neck, because you're gonna have to get everybody back again up to quorum to finish the meeting. It's gonna be hard to do that if there aren't any other articles on the warrant.
The minor articles go quickly. They don't hold us up.
That would be my
A few
advice.
minor articles here.
Gotcha. And I hear you. Yes,
The o-
Claire?
The only ones that leave are the school people.
Hence, if we hold it to the end, they'll stay and we'll make sure we keep our numbers up.
Yeah, but
I want to move it further.
Again, that's
I
not
want to get,
necessarily the case.
I want to get some of these issues out of the way before we get into the budget.
it used to always be Article 3. And then a few years ago, they changed it, but it was always the third article on
The budget was?
it. It's always. So when they moved it, then it got confused.
I'd just like to get some of these things out of the way. We'll discuss that and figure out what we want to get out of the way first. But, what do you put off till after? I mean, capital expense, purchases in here are relevant to the budget. And most of these other articles come and go very quickly.
Honestly, if it's on the warrant, it's important. I don't really care what order they go
Right.
in, and if you run out of quorum, then I just look around, and I hate to say this, but I will blame the entire town for not sending the 3,000 voters so we don't have to worry about quorum. If that happens, it's not on me on how I set up the warrant. It's on the town for not participating in their own budget, which the state mandates we have to include your voice. So just so you know, if we do this, it's not my fault. Like I said, bring a lunch bag. All right, Ralph, and then I'll get to you, Mary. And
When
then-
does the planning board have to release the finalized proposed bylaw before the warrant?
I don't think there's any legal requirement, but we have requested that they would provide it no later than June 3rd, so that we had at least 2 weeks to publish it so people could read it before the meeting.
For the June 6th meeting, the public meeting.
No, we wanted to make sure people had 2 weeks at minimum to read it before the town meeting. The
Yeah.
public hearing prior to that was not,
We
we didn't want it 2 weeks prior to that. We weren't asking the planning board to give it 2 weeks prior to your public hearing.
No, we want it printed for that public hearing.
And that makes complete sense, and I agree with
We just
that.
requested
Right.
that.
There is a legal requirement.
What is it?
The planning board is required to vote at least 14 days prior to town meeting on whether they approve or disapprove of any zoning article, which means that it has to be finalized at least 2 weeks prior to town meeting so that they can be voting on the thing that's being proposed.
Are we doing June 18th? Is that the date?
Yes.
Just trying to make sure I'm looking at that.
That's
So
what no changes.
the 4th, June 4th would be the date that they have to have that vote done,
Yeah, so we would be able to have.
which would be 2 days prior to the public hearing on the
print lots for
6th.
people to take with them, because they can't be going into town meeting and reading that bylaw.
Right.
So you've got to pass the word, everybody needs to go to the public hearing. We get maybe 15, 20 people. We
Pass the
need
word
more
if they're
people.
actually concerned about how these bylaws are gonna be written. That is the
We need
best
to be-
spot to get started, or you're gonna get confused on the floor of the town meeting if people start making motions to revise.
If they go to the public hearing, they will know what's going on and can ask the questions at that time.
If we actually think we'll get more than 6 people, we might choose a venue bigger than the senior center. But so far, we haven't come close enough to fill the tables at the senior center, so prove me wrong.
That's fine.
Line up outside the door saying, why don't I have a chair?
We go over the warrant.
Mary Jane.
35 is a safety issue and a senior citizens petition. I just wanted to know that.
Oh, I know what you're saying. All right, I hear
I was
you.
wondering
Yep,
if-
yep. I recognize what you're saying.
And also my second question, if I could maybe assign the people that don't vote on their taxes or something, and something be a warrant or not?
No.
If you don't vote?
It's a right, not a requirement, so you cannot do anything like that.
Okay.
It actually almost is a weird way of almost saying you're trying to manipulate a vote by forcing people to participate that may not want to.
Well, even if they're there, they don't have to vote, they can just sit on their hands, they don't even have to vote, even if they are there.
But they may say that they're losing money because they should be at work.
Oh,
And then I am actually having to pay them to be there, and now I'm in trouble. Because I'm not allowed to legally pay someone to show up at a town meeting and vote.
That's why there's 2,800 people in town that put the trust in the 200 of us that go to town meeting.
right. Oh,
We're,
wow.
we're a very well-trusted group of individuals.
Is our sign
So-
working so you can put that up in the center of the town for the public hearing?
Yeah. And I believe we will continue. It has been working. It's still working, right? Isn't it still there?
We could
Or
ask,
did we pull it?
It's not there currently.
we could ask the school if they put it in their new
I'd
electric
like
board
to
as
see if
well.
we put that there, like,
The public
Tomorrow.
hearing on the 6th and then
please
change
put in the
it to
official request to
town
Bob.
meeting.
You got the senior center sign.
Yes, we have the senior center in the school, we can request both facilities to put these on their signs for a day or two or before, at least a few days.
The
No.
school might not, just because they got graduation and all that, where they got other things they want to advertise, but the senior center, I definitely think we could get them to.
Graduation's before that, isn't it?
Yes, graduations, probably, yeah.
Well,
early
last
March.
year, when we tried to schedule the meeting, we couldn't get the auditorium because they were doing graduation the following weekend, and that was set up for, so it's so close, they're not gonna wanna, them advertising it for 2 days is not the benefit. It's advertising it for 2 weeks, so the random passerbyers go, oh, right, town meeting. So that's why I'm suggesting, I don't know if the school is worth really pushing on at the moment. We can always ask. Just,
Wherever you can get it.
800
Public
families.
Town
hearing
crier.
And the town meeting.
June
So-
6th, senior center, what time?
7:00.
And that's just, that's a review of the warrant articles.
Yeah,
See, most people
mandatory
don't
public
even
hearing
know
on it.
what the public hearing is.
it's true.
But if we can get it out to people.
All right, so what I'd like to do now is just more officially, go through each one.
Sure.
Unless you see a need to clarify, or if anybody out there has a copy, wants to know more, bring it up as I go, but I'm just gonna identify it by the article number.
Are these as it was?
And then the Board of Selectmen are gonna play the I do or do not approve for it to still be on the warrant article, warrant, or to move it. Article 1's great, but I wanna move it to the end. Article 35, safety issue that Mary Jane brought up, I wanna move it to 20.
The dishwasher,
something.
yeah, that was the only addition.
That's generally what I'm trying to accomplish here, is just to identify, these will be included, and this is the order we would like to have them be included so that our office can get started on finalizing, producing, and all the other details in case we want to do just that.
I have read this as Andrew put it out in email.
Yeah.
So I don't know if we really want to read the whole thing to everyone again, but I'm comfortable with everything in here and how they're written, and I acknowledge your one addition of the dishwasher for Ruggles Lane to it.
Where's that?
Article 22.
22. Third door, middle page,
Okay.
page 4. Now that the pages are numbered. I acknowledge your numbering of the pages. Dishwasher for Ruggles Lane.
Do you have any comments you want to talk about, whether we should or shouldn't include anything, or just include it all in a general note and then talk about if we want to move anything? Like, do we want to go by article and say do we or do we not want it?
There was one more request that, I know I talked to you before about the one on for the water department. I have to touch base with Jason on, just to make sure, to see if it fits in, or if it's something that we can just add on to the budget. But the other one that we had a request on that wasn't included on here was there was $50,000 for Ruggles Lane driveway. I didn't know if that was something that you wanted to include
that
on there.
Sidewalk and parking lot?
Sidewalk and
Is that
parking
going to
lot.
come from Chapter 90 funds?
No, that would have to
It's
come from
not
free
considered a
cash,
road.
but if the school is where they're at, then we don't have the money to
Yeah.
afford it, so. It's one of those, do you put it on there and request to table it if the school doesn't come down in their number?
How much of that is something that could, or maybe even should have been addressed a little bit with operating funds to reduce the level of degradation that we've now landed in? This has been brought up for 2-3 years now.
How much
And
from
how
there?
much of the work on the sidewalks have we done to even try to patch and repair them to just help?
I don't think we've touched them.
That's my point. If you don't do anything, then I'm not just gonna wait for it to die and give you cash to buy a new one.
Right.
I'm not the MSBA.
But the,
I don't just say, thanks for letting it die, here's 80% to
Yeah,
buy a
well,
new school.
the district, I know under the district agreement, anything that's over 50, or under, above 5,000, it's a capital improvement that goes onto the town to fund.
That's why I was talking about operational repairs, because about $500 might have fixed some of the worst issues.
Right.
I really meant it, I'm not asking them to take on a huge, but if there's something where they're saying somebody could trip, they waited too long to ask us to replace their sidewalks. And is that the condition we believe those sidewalks are in, is someone could trip?
Is that what?
Yes,
And it's against the MAAB accessible guidelines of the depth and the angles of the tripping hazard.
I think they're in that condition in places. I do believe that, unfortunately.
Then I would just suggest that somebody go do some repair on it now. I don't want to wait for the lawsuit to say, why didn't you do the capital upgrade? That's kind of the point I'm getting at, is if we can't do that, we still got to do the maintenance on it.
Right, without tearing it all up.
And
we could
that's,
certainly
again,
patch.
not our jurisdiction to just go in and say we're gonna maintain the sidewalk, so who's doing the maintenance?
I mean, the,
That would have to go to the district agreement too, and their maintenance of the property that's in their care. Who's responsible to maintain that, us or them, in the agreement?
They are. They own the
I'm sure.
operating costs and we own the capital costs.
I know, but with the structure and the property, it still might,
If they
I don't know.
paint
but
a
it-
classroom, I'm guessing
That's
it's
them.
operating.
But if you're talking about building windows cracked or structure, it may be us. I don't know. It may be us. And
Yeah, I'm not trying to say take a 4x4
know.
square sidewalk, take it out and pour another one.
right.
you patch it.
But I
I'm
don't think
saying
this
you
was-
got spalling. You don't just let it sit there so the high heels keep catching and somebody falls over.
But it-
And that's not a reference to man or woman and who's, it's just the first thing that came to mind of what catches in a crack in a sidewalk.
I think the
A high
request,
heel, not a flat-footed shoe.
the request was for the sidewalk and the parking lot, so the full scope of work. So that was a $50,000 request. I guess the question
I
is
thought we
whether or not
had
you
questions, we were
want
even talking to DPW about that I wasn't sure 50,000 was gonna do that parking lot repair, because that's not addressing the reason the parking lot failed. That's a quick scrape and skim coat, but you're gonna have those dips and valleys
Right.
again soon, because you don't have the right drainage, or you don't have the right
And that was
pitch, or, that's where I was like, 50,000 still is
And that's
short.
right.
That's why School Street's been put off in getting paved, because until the drainage is fixed, what's the point of paving it? It's gonna
And
rot
that
out
was
again.
part of
That's why I was focusing on the
my
sidewalk.
hesitation to put it on the warrant, because not having those answers, those questions answered, we're not even getting to the point of supporting it. But whether or not we want to put it on there in case those questions are answered before then, or the school comes down on their number and it becomes something that we can afford, or none of
You know
those
what I'd
questions
rather put
are
on
answered
there?
and we just table it.
Get a quote to find out what it would cost to review, engineer, and create bid documents to address it.
Right.
Not to do the capital, but figure out what it's gonna cost to do it right.
Right. Where's the number coming from?
And then we go get the engineer to come in and do what we need to do to say, how do we make this and be done with it? That would be my first thought, is let's do that. And then that comes with a cost estimate. And if anybody's curious, it comes with a cost estimate by state law. If you're gonna be a designer, under the designer selection board rules and regs, you have to provide cost estimates and life cycle analysis with the proposal. So if anybody's curious, it doesn't cost more to get the cost estimate. You're not allowed to do the design.
I agree. I don't like to put something on here when I don't know where the number comes from and what they're gonna do with that number.
That would be my first thought.
I think throw a cold patch in the parking lot.
That's why I left
and
it off in the
replace
first
whole
place. I didn't have
sidewalk.
the answers to those questions. So
And I think
just
that
wanted to
was
let you guys-
kind of some of the discussions we had before about it, is we're still trying to like, what supports the $50,000 number? And I didn't have a good anything that supported it.
Right, and the way it's generally written, they could be doing a brand new sidewalk and just patching the parking lot.
Yeah.
Or vice versa. It doesn't stipulate how much for what each.
I'm not knocking it, but if
You
you
gotta
had
know
a
what they're gonna
thought,
do.
but then it doesn't work, then you allocate money to something, then it sits there and never gets used.
Or it gets
We've
wasted.
got, I don't know how many articles for sidewalk repair waiting to be done because we don't have the other resources to match the funding. So now we gotta look at it a different way to see if we can accomplish some of this work, and it means more money. Or we get lucky with the right resources. Yes.
Matt, on Article 21, that Ruggles Lane PA system and telephone replacement, that's replacing all of their telephones and their announcement system and everything?
That's my
And
understanding.
that the
$30,000.
PA in the, that we use, when we're up there,
Yeah.
because it's not the best.
I don't know if it's what we use or not. I just know it's a public address system, which may not be what you're using on the stage.
Yeah.
Right,
do
it's,
it.
it's probably the
So
school-wide,
we'll
classroom-wide.
find that out, because
Yeah.
we use that and that is needed in there.
Well, I think the town needs to start looking at investing and not counting on the school district's audio-visual support for our meetings and all that. We have, how many times do we have somebody asking about needing that for a meeting or a location? We don't, and we go reaching for someone else to help us because we don't even have it.
I do have
I
those
think
quotes.
we should have some type of speaker, microphone system that we own and we bring to our events that we do throughout the town. That'd be something to look into someday. So right now, we're talking about adding, do we want to add in just for tonight's vote, what's in? Again, water department could always say, never mind, we changed our mind. But add in the drilling of the well, just get the vote done so you can just start working it. And then we can, if they pull it, and we can not worry about that.
Yeah, it's just,
No, I'm just curious if it helps just keep this going, so that.
yeah, that's fine.
I don't see why not.
Just don't sign this one.
Oh, no, it wouldn't, my recommendation here is we just make the vote. And if things
To authorize
change,
it,
like
go on.
orders change and all that, because we talked about maybe moving some of these around, then you can redraft it, and then we can actually sign that.
Okay.
So, all right, just to clarify right now, what I'm suggesting is we have Articles 1 through, and the very last one, 36. So that'd be Articles 1 through 37. 37 would be the addition of the water department potentially drilling a well.
Right.
Probably. They'll provide clarification on the details. It's.
Probably be moved up with their other article, those will renumber, push them around.
Right. So we gotta.
But it'll include 37 articles, 1 through
Right,
37.
be within the
That or we
cap.
put it at the very end because they hadn't been able to confirm they want it
Yeah.
for today, and I don't wanna have to have him redraft a whole new numbering system because we held it and then didn't want it. Or we're just putting it in anyway.
I'm
And
just
they'll
gonna
drop
affirm-
it on the floor if they want.
Just gonna
Okay,
affirm with
so
them
we'll-
tomorrow.
So we're gonna have 1 through 37 articles. Do you have any questions on voting to include all 37 articles?
Are we sure that these marijuana articles are all gonna meet the clarification in the planning board to get here in time for the warrant? And should they all stay on the warrant?
They have a meeting scheduled for June 4th, I believe, that has 2 or 3 of the public hearings required to address the referral from us to them.
It doesn't need their
But
recommendation
we
before
don't
it goes
need
on?
their recommendation to put it on. We're just required to send the recommendation to them,
If they-
ask for the word.
If they can't provide a recommendation, it's to be tabled. They're required to provide a recommendation.
So for it to be on the
Yeah.
warrant?
Well, no, it could be on the warrant, it just can't be entertained unless they provide a recommendation.
It can't?
That can be good or
The
bad.
motion-
Or we're not required
If they
to
don't have
entertain
a
it?
recommendation, then the motion that's made under the article would be out of order.
So it still requires the planning board's recommendation. Favorable or
I
unfavorable? It
believe it.
They
requires
gotta go one
something.
way or the other.
Okay.
If they don't go one way or the other, then it can't be acted on at town meeting.
This is what I was saying, the zoning issues are tough. You can't force a zoning issue in town. It affects our tax base and everything else.
Well, I thought the 2/3 was enough for that. It's hard to force that on people, you know? You get 67% show up and vote for it, but.
Well, you get,
Zoning is
Apparently it's
supposed to
even
be
more.
hard to change.
we get
Okay.
2/3 of 3% of people. We get 2% of the town can change it. And that's the problem if it hits the floor.
Well, all right.
And they should
We'll
be
leave
there.
them all there though, but like you said, if it shows up, we just, it's out of order, we
Until they
can't
stay in.
address it.
All right, then I make a motion that we accept these 36 articles and add the 37th being the drilling of the new well for the water department.
I'll second that.
And we can talk
Call
about.
for a vote,
Aye.
or is there further discussion? I'm sorry, we did a lot of discussing. Aye.
Aye.
All right, now what I'd like to do is look at this and see if we have any things we would like to move from one end to the other. I would like to start the year, recommend moving Article 35. This is a citizen's petition from Mary Jane Beatty. I would like to move this,
To position
if we're okay
25.
to it,
Position.
immediately to
25. After our town
yeah, I
business.
got you, we could do that there.
And I'd also.
Right to article, just before Article 25.
Thank you.
I'd also like to place just before that, the omnibus, and take care of all our other purchases first.
No.
That would make people happy in town that do come. They get frustrated, the school goes first on the list. So we do our normal things, we get our purchases for equipment done, which don't usually take long, and then we'll do the omnibus. Before all the marijuana bylaws, which is gonna drag out, but I'd like to move it back.
Here's our,
So it would be it would wind up being item number 24. We get all of our stabilization transfers and everything else, so,
Article 5.
or actually, I take that back, make it 23, do our stabilization transfer last, because we might need to amend that depending what happens.
So after.
We also gotta move that drill up,
No say about the
water drill up.
Mhm. Just gotta be careful.
So
when
if we were to
move
do
it.
this, you're recommending Articles 11 through 13, because those are all three of the operating budgets, omnibus type stuff. 11 through 13,
Well, the water and sewer, okay, yeah, sure.
they're their operating budget, not their capital budget is all I mean.
All right, 11 through 13, so these would bump up, they'd be 21, 22, and 23. They would become 21, 22, and 23, then everything before that would bump up 3.
Why are you doing that, Greg?
I've heard a lot of people request over the years that they'd like to see the school budget come a little further and make them wait their turn, especially they often jump to the front of the line. But I don't want to put it off.
Article 11, 12, and 13.
You know, I want it done before we get
Move up
into
and
the,
go between Article 23
the
and Article
marijuana
24,
discussions.
the
But
way it's
most of these
currently
things,
written.
Claire, the lawnmower request, engine 4, Felton Field, all these little improvements go very quickly. And let these get done so the whole town hears it.
Now,
Then we do the school
you might
budget.
agree with me, you
We
might
want to do
not.
it after the capitals.
If our budget
Before the transfer of
isn't
stabilization.
balanced
So we're gonna
going to
move that.
town meeting, we're gonna have to use free cash.
11, 12.
Correct.
That's why I'm doing it before stabilization transfer.
Yeah, no, but you've
In
got
between
stuff spending money
The
for free
existing
cash
budget's
on these
agreement and
things.
the transfer.
And you can't vote to do it if you get to the budget thing and we don't have the money for our budget.
All the things we proposed here, we have the money for, but it would change our stabilization number. If the school doesn't do what we want, that would change what we're putting into stabilization from our free cash. So I'd say we do this before stabilization, because if we have to make a modification, we can do it there.
Like 23.
But I think,
No, like the
Forget the
streets,
purchase agreement.
you know, suppose they, you know what I'm
Then
trying to
the
say, Andrew?
Right. The
It's
only thing
long
is,
overdue.
you know, the number
The end
for
of
the
those
school isn't
three.
gonna change at the town meeting. They're not gonna come in and say, I have great news, just because it's our turn on the budget, we're reducing our cost by our assessment by $100,000. You're gonna know well before the meeting that what that number is gonna be, and if it changes, it's gonna change after. So we would know before that meeting whether
And we
or not
can-
we're
and we
going
can pull them
to
on
table
that.
those articles, even before we entertain the school's budget.
Can you move them from one place to another
at meeting,
at the meeting?
yes. The moderator's done that for the school many times over the years.
Like
Somebody
the
modifies
street
it.
sweeper or something like
Right, but we can, but if it doesn't fit, we can table it.
You could table it and then have a motion to reconsider later in the meeting.
Reconsider it later on.
Yeah.
I'm just afraid of them spending the money and we won't have money to fund that budget. If you move it.
I
You get your
believe,
budget
I believe,
paid
this-
for first.
I
before you
believe the
get-
school
We'll have to
work.
modify the amount going to free cash.
I believe the
Stabilization,
school,
Probably more
Suppose you
likely.
didn't have anything, suppose they spend it all.
Then you screwed up.
I didn't.
I'm joking.
I
I'm just
believe
gonna
the
blame
school-
the finance committee, because that's what I'm gonna do. Even though it's not right, it's not accurate.
And I think that's why they always had the budget as Article 3, because they wanted to make sure you got that paid first before you went to the others. That was before the school went
Right.
up so high.
And I'd rather pay the others first and let the school realize that it's just not there. And I think they heard that tonight. I think they understand that, and I think they'll make an effort. I hope they will. Because the school is an important part of this town. But when you realize you're getting $6 and the whole rest of the town gets $4, it's hard to make a town and a community off of that. And it's hard to have students in that school that want to be here if the town is in disarray. I think they heard it, and I'm hoping they'll make serious attempt to do more. In the meantime, everyone's got to work on the state. The state
What
isn't
I would
changing contribution
suggest-
at all. It's below it.
Is if the budget we're putting before the town is the budget finance committee recommends. So the omnibus budget and then the water and the sewer operating enterprise budgets. If you do your capital first, it's a lot harder for someone to stand in front of town and say, you need to raise this line item in my personal omnibus budget. Because you'll be able to look right back to them and say, we just bought you a street sweeper, we're not raising your operating budget line item. Or we just bought you your tasers, we're not raising your overtime line item. Or, so in other words, it makes it easier to stand on that omnibus budget if someone says, I think I need more in my line item. And most of those departments had their chance at the finance committee prior to town meeting, but I'm just saying.
We haven't called them back for a second review.
But I'm just saying it's in the finance committee's favor to do it this way because you actually have stronger strength in front of the town saying everything you just approved was based on us with this budget. You changed that, now you.
And when they ask for the
So-
finance committee's
But I
position,
really
say
think
unfavorable, you can explain it.
I
It's
disagree.
either way, it doesn't matter.
Okay.
I really don't think it's gonna matter either way, because what we're presenting in front of the town is what we've already agreed the town should spend. These are all budget items that we went through either finance committee or through us and the capital planning. So it's not
We
like
haven't finished with
approving
the-
one before the other is throwing off what we plan to do.
We haven't finished with the budget.
Well,
We haven't voted on anything.
you're gonna be
on that
finished by
budget.
Thursday, I understand.
I don't know if we'll be by Thursday. Joshua, we need people now. We couldn't meet last week because we didn't have a quorum.
Working on it.
Should we move that vote?
On Article 16, now the police service revolvers, is that where we're getting, no, that was the tasers, right? Where he got a grant?
Tasers were in the grant, yes.
The tasers were the grant. Now, were there any of those on here?
Bulletproof vests for the grant.
They're all,
The bulletproof vests for the grant.
okay.
Oh, the tasers were on the 5-year program, or the?
Yes.
Yeah.
that's right,
That's what that was my suggestion. We make our purchases first, then do the omnibus budget, and then we worry about stabilization, and then we can have Mary Jane's article up, and then we'll get into our heavy discussions on the bylaws.
So generally what we're suggesting, if I'm correct right now, is we're gonna keep the articles in order outside of the operating budget ones, the 11, 12, 13.
Yes.
And then we're gonna continue with it from 14 all the way to 23.
Correct.
Then the first thing we're gonna insert after 23 will be the well.
Well, then this.
'Cause that's-
Yep.
And then we do,
Stable.
no. The reason I'm suggesting that is you go through the omnibus budget and all that. And now you know what you have for free cash to put into stabilization. So you
Right.
still keep that as the last one of the money items.
Right.
So if anybody were, so we're really moving the 3 budgets and the other capital item from water department and squeezing them between Article 23 and Article 24 that we're looking at right here.
Right. And then after the water item, then we have the stabilization 24. And then Mary Jane's could be the next. And then we'll get into our bylaws and the heavy hitting things.
Right, and then, like he said, the one bylaw we're moving would be Mary Jane's, and we're gonna move it right up to, right after the stabilization free cash article.
Right. So those would number as follows.
And then I'm okay with whatever order we do any of these marijuana bylaws, because at any point, if you feel like a discussion went long enough on one particular zoning bylaw and you think it's time to give somebody another chance to voice their zone, you can table it. Request to table it, have this gentleman present his, if they can't somehow prior to getting to the meeting to come to an agreement. open the floor for discussion there, and then you've got to figure it out. Which one's going to go for vote? Because I don't think anybody sitting at that town is going to present an argument that's going to make it to a motion to vote on, that wouldn't make it to a motion without revising it. It just may not pass anyway. I don't know if it'll pass. It may pass. I'm just saying, if you've got two different bylaws and they both had citizens petition signatures on it, not that you need 200 on an annual, but they had more than they needed. And they both make it to the floor at some point for discussion, and somebody wants to make a recommendation to modify one or the other, and you go through that process and say it passes. I don't know how much that's gonna change the end result vote of that bylaw if somebody else still thinks the other bylaw is better. Because that's the situation we've had for 2.5 years. And we don't have a 2/3 majority in this town that favors one of the two bylaws. We almost got through on a special town meeting. But now you're talking about much smaller populations involved in that voting. So it's hard to gauge how an annual town meeting would be versus special town meeting in that response, for me. So the truth is, I'm afraid. And I'm also afraid if the Attorney General isn't going to accept another moratorium extension. I don't know if they will or won't. I know people have thought it
Is there one
won't.
on the warrant?
Citizens petition.
There's a citizen's petition for a moratorium extension?
Yep.
Yes.
So we can't deny it.
Well, yes and no.
How do we deny it?
Um,
It was already referred to the planning board.
If town council, and you'd have to ask town council this, but if town council tells you that a motion is on its face illegal, then that motion will be out of order. So,
But it's not illegal.
well, that's what, okay, then it'll go forward. So you just need to.
My understanding is it's just a fear that the Attorney General's only, like, they're only letting moratoriums go so long before they're like, that's it.
Oh,
I gave you 3 years to come up with a bylaw, you can't even get anything?
yeah.
The only way you're gonna get a bylaw is if you realize you don't have the backup and you have to suffer the fact that you're gonna get inundated with, because you chose not to do this.
So you can make that argument at a town meeting.
And that was, we brought that up actually in the last meeting, that we had the fear that we're gonna get to a point. And so I think that's what spurred the citizens petition, because it was also a citizens petition that came from a member of the planning board who thought we wouldn't put it on the warrant. And they may have been right. I'll admit that one. Because we feel we just gotta get a bylaw that'll pass. And we didn't think we were getting the movement on the way it was drafted to get one that would pass. Doesn't matter though, like I said, they're drafting it, it's gonna go before the town and the town's gonna vote. We'll figure out what happens. We've had our voice. They've heard the same thing now for a year. So if they're gonna do something, they're gonna do it. If they're not, they're not. Is there anything else on the warrant, the way we have it structured, or what's included that you are?
On
Yes,
the,
Claire.
Hilton Field improvements, I have made contact with Ann Goby. I
You
sent her
did?
an email, yes.
About a park of ours?
And she's interested in knowing what exactly improvements they want to know, they want to do. Because she said there may be grants there for them. I told her they were looking to make improvements and looking for more money, and couldn't the state help us out? So I've got to get back to her. I think they've got a meeting the 4th of June,
Good day.
because I was going to go
Felton
to the
Field does?
meeting. See if I can find out exactly what they're looking for.
Okay.
And then I'll send her the list.
I don't know how much of it's the same scope, but it just costs more than they originally thought, or if they've expanded the scope of what they presented the last time when we. Was it
Because
special
they
town
have-
meeting, we gave them some money also? And they were gonna use that to tie it into their original fund?
There was nothing special. Everything was
It was the.
Last
Last
annual?
last annual.
Okay.
Is 15. I think that their request was that we knew it was gonna take a number of years to do work, and we're kind of taking it as, we're asking for a little now, we're gonna ask for a little bit later
Okay.
to get where we need to go.
But I had asked.
Well, I need a bigger
them to
plan.
mention
If I'm
finance.
gonna do that again, give me the plan. Don't tell me I'm gonna do this today. I'll come and ask for more tomorrow. Concept of planning. I would request a plan. I know that that's all I can do because they are also an elected commission. Fulton Field Commission. Okay. So, they don't have to answer me.
The town owns the land.
Yes, they have to answer to the town. They definitely do not have to answer to the Board of Selectmen.
And when I asked them. if
So
they
we gotta
had-
just make sure we recognize that that is the case. These are requests we make. We do not tell them what they can do and can't do.
Well, I had asked them when they came into the finance committee meeting if they had contacted Ian Goby. And they said, oh, no, they haven't. So that's when I sent the email.
Okay. And hopefully that'll help.
Yeah.
Who puts together the actual finance committee? You do?
Yep.
Okay. I'm gonna send you, I'm gonna add a little bit of language at the beginning, I'll send it.
Perfect, thanks.
Make sure Claire approves it. It's her booklet.
We used to do it ourselves.
Um,
And then Heather started doing it. 'Cause I did a few of them.
I mean, it's what you're doing. You're trying to get the information out the best way you know how, and hopefully as time goes on, we each get better and each add a little bit to just do that. What's going on with the
33
town report?
articles?
Who's building that? How are we getting the town report done this year?
Monty Tech is doing it. Sandy, you were just out today taking a look at the draft. They're going to be coming out with a second draft tomorrow for us, and as soon as we give it the okay, they'll be printed.
We never had discussions
33 articles?
about who would be on the cover. The story might
Town
be
people
on
through this?
the first page. Are we referencing somebody? Did that get
Dedication is
approved?
going
What was how many articles in number?
Bonnie Mackey, who's on the Council on Aging,
I
she's
we count.
passed away.
Are they
That
added?
came from,
I think we're out of
I
order.
think, the Historical Society. She's a long-time Barry resident. The cover is a sunset of the Old Town Hall.
I appreciate it. I just remember it seemed like every year it was like, came before the board of who should we dedicate it to and this, and I don't recall that happening
So I'm missing a page.
until I might have missed it.
New to me.
But, yeah,
What's this
Um,
one involving?
I'm not saying it had to.
Is that
I'm just saying that's what I remember happening. So
Oh,
don't get me wrong, this isn't like, why didn't you do? It's like, I just remember that's how
Somebody's
it's
counting
happening,
It
but
always did.
What's that?
Oh, this is on page 6.
Did it?
I'm
Okay.
trying to
Yeah.
remember it and I can't get my numbers to work. I'm saying it's not
here's
working.
something I'd like to ask people here. Moderator, finance committee, town administrator. So I'm kind of coming from different directions. The finance committee
So,
makes a recommendation of the budget. But the town meeting is more than the budget. We got all the bylaws, we got everything. Who technically is presenting the town meeting to the town?
6.
Is it the Board of Selectmen? Is it the moderator? Is it the planning? Like, who
6.
runs the meeting, sets it all up,
It's the month.
and you have no budget to do it,
That's
correct?
what I want.
Right,
I want you.
right. The,
So you only
By
do it if
statute-
we give you money.
well, by
From our budget.
statute, the finance committee is responsible, in Barry, it's a finance
Presenting the
committee.
budget.
In other towns, it's an advisory committee, but by statute, there has to be one or the other. So there has to be a committee that prepares the information to present clearly to the people so that they're not just listening to motions and, you know, they gotta have something to read, right? And that has to be from a finance committee or an advisory committee. We have a finance committee, Mary, under our bylaw.
But that's more specific to the budget articles, not the entire report.
That's the whole meeting. The finance committee is responsible for producing a report of all articles on the warrant.
Okay.
So there are.
But they
budget
only have to
articles, there are
provide
non-budget articles.
recommendations on
The
the
finance
monetary
committee has-
items.
The finance committee should make recommendations on all items. It is in their power to choose to abstain on a particular item that they don't want to for whatever reason. But they should make a recommendation on every item. Because although we call them a finance committee, they are a finance advisory committee. They're an advisory committee. Their job is to advise town meeting on what town meeting should do. In some towns, all motions are made by the finance committee. We don't do that here. But that is one of the procedures that towns use.
All right. Well, I appreciate that, because that was one of those things where I sat there and I was like, okay, don't I? Like, do I just sit here and then I jump up on a motion, or do I have some more of a role, or, and that's where I was always curious, because I didn't know.
Yeah, in Barry, the tradition is that the motions are made by department heads, by selectmen. I can't remember a single one ever made by finance committee, by the citizens who are making their petitions. It's unusual.
10 or 11.
Certainly unusual.
But it was unusual.
Yeah.
Probably a citizen's petition you wrote in yourself. No, I'm just.
It was something they said we had to.
Yeah, so, but, yeah, it's, you know, it's traditionally in our town, it kind of moves around so that everyone's participating.
Thank you.
See if they count through. They should
So
count-
you're gonna get
should
info
count
to
through
Andrew
in
to
order.
add into the finance booklet?
Yeah. And just something that, just for all of you to know, that when you choose not to do action on a warrant article, you've been using the wrong word. So you can't table a warrant article because a warrant article is an motion. So if you want to skip over something, the right thing to do is to make a motion to take no action on warrant article X.
Okay.
So, and I'll make sure everybody knows that, and I'll send you, and it's just a wording thing.
So if there's a complete article that someone agrees to abandon on the floor per se.
Right.
The thing is to make a motion to take no action on this article.
Exactly. It's
Okay.
very confusing to say table, even though we kind of understand what you mean, because under the rules of order that we follow, town meeting time, a tabling actually requires 2/3. But that's not what, a motion to table, it's just a regular motion, it doesn't require 2/3. So calling it a table is confusing to people. We
Okay.
shouldn't do it, because that's
Ta-
not what it is.
Tabling is a definition to remove something, is it not? Then not vote on it.
You can
now
only
and remove
table
it.
a motion. A warrant article is not a motion.
So once a motion's been made,
Once a motion's
someone
been
else
made,
can
you
ask to
then
table
make a
that
to
motion.
Table that.
Right.
And a motion to table
Means you don't vote on it.
means you don't vote on it then. And then if the meeting runs out and nobody made a motion to bring it off the table, then it's dead. But at any time later in the meeting, anyone can say, I make a motion
To take no action.
that we raise the motion on Article 7 from the table. And then you're back into discussing it again.
Okay.
So it's a way of pushing things down the meeting.
And that's more the language if we're bouncing between competing zoning bylaws.
Yeah, it's very.
In other words, if you read the first, then you read the second, but you realize you want to go back to the first, now you've got to say,
Yeah, and
motion
I'll
to
manage-
table this one, and then
And I'll manage that process.
And a motion to take no action.
we'll just look at
means
you and go,
For the night, there's no action on it.
Yeah, that's exactly right. For a motion to take no action, you're saying that we're not gonna do anything on this.
And they can't bring it back.
They could. Anything can be brought back later in the meeting with a motion to reconsider. The motion to reconsider may or may not be in order, depending upon whether there's a good reason. So it's not enough that I've looked around the audience and decided that the people who were voting that way have all left, and therefore we should vote on that again. That's not a good reason for a motion to reconsider. A motion to reconsider, if you've gone ahead and voted on this zoning article, and it passed, say, and then you voted on that other zoning article, and it also passed, and now they're in conflict, someone might move to reconsider the first one, right, because there's a problem having both of them, right? That would be a valid reason for a motion to reconsider.
When you make a motion to reconsider, in that example, is it the same 2/3 vote?
The motion to reconsider is a majority vote to get debate started on that again, but then the actual vote to pass it again would be, well,
See, that's what I mean, you're kind of stuck in a weird, like, you're reconsidering something that's already passed, based on the example you presented.
yes.
So what you're saying now is in order to reconsider, you're actually looking for a vote to unpass it? Or are you saying the second one, because it was the last one voted, superseded the first? So you're reconsidering to see if it will re-supersede? Is that more what it is? You kind of got caught in a loop until someone stops winning the vote battle? It should end pretty quickly because you can't have 2/3 competing against itself very often.
You know,
If you do the math,
if
it
something passes,
won't work.
if something passes with 2/3 and then a majority agrees to reconsider it, that's not gonna pass. Because the majority already just decided that they're not, right? So they're way more than a third at that point. See what I'm saying?
Well, that's where I'm
So in your example.
getting to the,
practically
once you
speaking,
start there, all of a sudden, its own percentages start to cancel out the back and forth.
What's more likely to be brought up in a motion to reconsider would be something that it failed.
Yeah, okay. Any other questions on the warrant article? Article, so warrant itself.
I renumber the sheet on Andrew's page so it reads the way we want to, I believe. But I don't think it's important we go through it. When he retypes it, it'll be numerically valued properly.
Is this something we, 20th, I don't want to put us in this bind of like, come in and sign, you got 4 hours to get it done so I can get the constable out to start posting things.
For annual town meeting, it's only 7 days posting period, so we have it until.
Okay, so the
Yeah,
June
a week
3rd
before.
meeting still gives us a week to get a constable to post things with still plenty of time. Okay. All right, so we'll deal with that, you revise it on June 3rd, we'll finalize everything and address that.
So we want to make it work. I was missing a page. I didn't have the numbers. Like, why am I losing that?
Check behind the printer.
All right,
Done now.
anybody else further discussion on the warrant? Okay, that's done, we're moving on. We're gonna skip the library occupancy agreement, if you don't mind, we'll just push that to the next meeting. What I'm looking to do is take stuff that generally is just us and get rid of it and deal with those that are here that have other things. Is there something in specific that anybody in the room wants to speak of between the Savage Race, Memorial Day parade events?
Just go through them. Can't you just,
I can, but the Savage Race sometimes can turn into quite a lengthy discussion, so I was trying to.
This one's just for review, it hasn't got to the departments for their final sign off yet, we just got it in, so I just wanted to at least put it in front of you guys for your
To say we
information.
have it and we can start reviewing it ourselves.
Right.
Okay. That item is addressed. We have it, we can start reviewing it ourselves.
is there a date?
There's a date. I forget the date.
July 4th.
July 13th and 14th or something like that. It's in.
July
13th
13th and
14th.
14th. It's a 2-day event according to this. Next item then would be use of town property, the American Legion Memorial Day celebration. Needless to say, the Board of Selectmen and other members are involved, but it is organized by the American Legion here in town, so it's much appreciated. Do I have a motion?
Motion to approve the Berry Legion use of the town property for Memorial Day celebrations.
Um,
That includes the roads. Includes all of the roads. Includes all of the roads.
It does?
Does that include, when you say in town property, includes all of the roads?
For the parade and for...
No,
No,
no, we, there's a parade,
they started,
there's a whole parade route that varies. Where did we walk from?
Yeah.
Fire
Yeah.
station?
I think
We
what
start from Pleasant Street, and we just go down past the Commons and back around, we just
yeah,
circle the
it's not
Commons.
a full route.
Rather than this just being, say, the common, because we're closing down a bunch of roads, I just want to make sure that that's all included.
Actually, they identify it only as the North Common, not as the bigger event that includes the walk around. So you're right, it doesn't include more.
Yeah. With the parade route.
Yeah, could you add the parade route and, as you did last year, I believe you just said, in all necessary traffic redirect.
Yeah, they did mention fencing and barricades, they did check off this time compared to. So yeah, we gotta get this cleaned up. The paperwork, have them just check with the police chief just to make sure that their expectations and his are the same. Just so we're on the same page. It may be the same thing and it may not be worth it, but you're right, they only indicated North Common on this application, so it's not complete. So I cannot say what they were thinking.
It says description of event, parade, street closings, yes.
Right, but which ones? Because this event technically says North Common, but we go down and we close streets down by St. Joseph's. We close streets off of Valley Road. In other words, communicate with the police chief what your intent is so he knows how to plan accordingly. That's all this
I'll
is.
modify my motion. Make a request that we approve the permit for Berry Post to American Legion to use the Memorial Day celebrations on the Common with the street closures the chief of police sees necessary for the day.
Second that.
I'd like to modify the motion to also waive the fee.
Of course.
Call for vote.
Aye.
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 Thank you, Chief. Where did I just bury my agenda? Right there.
Wage authorization.
Wage authorization, Ryan Hogg to a firefighter, EMT on call. Is this anything different, or is this just a different employee from the last one that came across?
Different employee.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Abstain.
I have a motion. Greg can't participate because he's a member.
Yep.
And he probably doesn't like Ryan, so he doesn't want to get in trouble for saying no.
I for motion to authorize this employee wage authorization.
I second that. Call for vote.
Aye.
Aye. Approval of Wholesome Farmers Market off-premise alcohol license. This was already approved to be sent to the state. The state has now come back saying that they're okay with it, so this is the final kind of dot the I, cross the T of getting the alcohol beverage license for Wholesome Farmers Food Market.
Not to be consumed on premises. I make a motion we approve the alcohol beverage license not to be consumed on premises for the Wholesome Farmers Market.
Sounds good. I second that. Call for vote.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right. Request for appointment, Mary Ann Watson says Council on Aging. We've discussed, Andrew's gonna reach out just to find out and confirm whether it was actually the age-friendly community committee she wanted to be on versus Council on Aging,
I think
because
she just
Council
said-
on Aging is already full.
Wasn't that who was just here and that's what she indicated?
No, that was
That was
Patricia
Kowal.
Kowal.
Patricia, oh, okay.
Cowell?
Co-op.
Oh, I got it right the first time. I'm
Oh, okay, so, okay, I see the two of them. Okay, so.
6 years, I should probably say her name correctly by now.
All right, so why don't we table that until Andrew confirms and move to the next?
Request for appointment, Richard Whippy and Patricia Kowal, Age-Friendly Community Committee. I'll make the motion to appoint both Richard Whippy and Patricia Kowal to the Age-Friendly Community Committee.
Second.
Call for vote.
All right,
Aye. Aye. Bum, 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 bum. We had meeting minutes, April 1st and May 6th.
make a motion to approve the meeting minutes of April 1st and May 6th, 2019.
Do I have a second? Somewhere buried in there are the meeting minutes.
In the front. That's in the front. Usually I put them in the front because you,
Our packet is all.
I know, I didn't go double around.
Even with this. While he's contemplating that, I'll just bring up a discussion briefly from the town of Hubbardston. We've had some emails and letters. It's regarding, it comes from Town of Hubbardston's Finance Committee. It's about their review of the Quabbin Regional School District budget and how it impacted them with what is proposed by the Quabbin Regional School District's school committee budget is, gives Hubbardston an 8.3 or an 8.8% increase in their assessment from last year. It's a combination of things. One of it is Hubbardston's town of assessor's evaluation of the property jumped, which increased Hubbardston's minimum RCL, whatever that, I keep forgetting what that stands for.
Minimum contribution, state contribution.
But also, I think population's changed just a little, so it kind of just rolled a lot more at Hubbardston than they expected in 1 year. And they're saying that 6% or less is better for them. They can kind of handle up to 6%. If it's over 6% or right at 6%, they could handle it, but they're gonna have to deal with a 2.5 prop override. And something about, was there something here that, well, what they pretty much said is we can't do the 8.83, but they'll work something around the 6%, preferably less than 6%. I believe the Hubbardston Board of Selectmen originally said that they didn't want to go higher than what would be the 5% impact to the town of Hubbardston. I know did we discuss this?
We supported the 1.4% budget increase recommendation.
Which gave Hubbardston their 5%.
Yes.
So the overall school district increase of 1.4%, Hubbardston gets hit by a 5% increase in their assessment. With the current 2% whatever, Hubbardston gets slammed with an 8% increase in their school budget assessment. We got a letter from their finance committee explaining what Hubbardston has to go through to reach that 6%, 5%, 8%. And they pretty much said we can't support the 8% without some massive 2.5 override, and they don't even want to go there. But they could deal with a little bit of a just over 6% and prefer to be under 6%. Recognizing that Hubbardston and Barry are the two larger contributors to the school budget, And generally where we lead, everybody else ends up having to follow whether they like it or not. I think we've been trying over the last couple of years to recognize the positions that New Braintree, Hardwick, and of course this year now Hubbardston are feeling, and I know I feel, and I think what we mentioned is similar agreement, is we'd rather be more in line with Hubbardston's request at the 1.4% that gives them their 5% assessment. To continue recognizing that we're working with our neighboring towns and dealing with the similar challenges. And so we're not gonna do it just because we can and know that it forces everybody else to do more than they can. That's where I'm coming from. I don't wanna speak for Greg or Dylan, they're right here. I let them say what they want.
I think my opinion was clear earlier, I don't need
Yeah.
to spend any more time on it.
And I don't know if you have any thoughts on that. but-
I don't have a comment at the moment.
Okay. So I just wanted you to know we got that letter, but in the meantime, we've been holding on a vote on the meeting minutes. We just wanted to give Dylan a chance to take a look at them to see if he had any comments or discussion before we.
So, I think, you know, in future conversations with the school, and I should have brought it up earlier when they were here, but I think part of it comes down to budget development philosophy. Because it's clear that the current philosophy of developing the budget comes down to what does the school need, minus what the state's willing to give you, leaves you with what the towns are going to be paying. And I think that there should be at least some consideration of a transition in that philosophy to saying what is the minimum the town's can afford, plus how much the state is willing to give equals the school's budget.
The budget would be closer to 29 million than 35 million if they did just what they had to spend according to state requirements.
But if they looked at that,
They had 6 million more in, not saying it's not justified.
Right.
But there's 6 million more in versus what the state believes is your minimum funding requirements.
So when they're building that budget and they build everything down, it comes down to that bottom number of saying that local contributions are going to go up 5 point something percent. If they started off by saying for towns' local contributions to go up 2.5% with state local, here's where the school's budget is.
Oh, I got you. If you look at the target that the town's can afford and then
Start
try to
with
figure out how to budget
start with the
within
town
that
target
versus
and
the
work.
other way.
Which
Right.
is what I was trying to explain tonight, what we have to do.
Right.
We start with our target, we have to tax according to that target, and we can't just make something up. And I think they should adopt a similar program.
So I think it's just more of budget building philosophy, working back from where the towns can be to there versus let's see how high we can come in and have 4 of the 5 towns still pass it. So.
The only other thing I would add to that, but I don't want to get too far into it, is just there's a lot more to, or should I say more than I currently know, involved with the things regarding these special education requirements and what the state does or does not mandate. I mean, I just learned and had no clue that preschoolers that require special education, apparently you're mandated to give it to them. I'm sorry, but the state should be slapped as hard as you can to get them to understand that that age in special education is not a school department function. And what I mean by that, in my opinion, is
Kindergarten used to be.
if you're not required to give a non-special education student preschool, then why are you making a school district give it to someone that requires more than what standard preschool requires? That's not what that is. That's a medical situation that should be funded and work through a different program than school.
That's a house and senate.
I think they've been taking a lot of their other budgetary things they can't budget and forcing it into the schools to cover, whether it's food programs. I don't know how many places adopted breakfast for everybody in town and then it becomes part of the school budget. Well, and I'm not knocking it. People have needs. I'm saying we still need to try to help people. But I don't think it has to fall on the school budget. Identify it separately as a need that we have to deal with, I'm okay with. I don't know enough about the special education requirements when it comes to every doctor, sociologist, or whatever that needs to be involved with the individual education, whatever, IEPs. And I recognize that. I don't know. So I'm not saying that it's not justified and the cost isn't justified and the need isn't there. But if it is all there, then I agree that there's a big issue with the state and what they believe is necessary to fund the way they expect kids to be taught today. So to me, that's a whole different world, and it's a long debate that's gonna go forever. We've already done enough of that, and I would rather help this gentleman find his way home sometime tonight, and the gentleman next to him as well.
When we sit and do our budget, we have to deal with our same regulatories and state rules and laws in all the town departments, and that's how we deal with our budget. In the school, yes, they have a whole nother set of rules, but that's up to them to figure out where they can make the cuts.
And I agree.
Painful as they are, I don't want to worry too much about how they have to do it, but worry about how it affects our end. And I think our request is reasonable tonight, and I think Hubbardston's request
Oh, I
is reasonable.
think it was reasonable. I just mean that
And we
because there's that
can't be
much I
given-
don't know, I don't
Right.
know how to even get into it to say this is.
It's nice to understand their budget.
It's
but
very
we can't
easy
tell
to
them what do
defend
with it.
something if somebody on the other side doesn't know enough about where that money's going.
But even if we do, it's not our place to say where to spend it, but we'd be better equipped to give them
Well, not the
suggestions if we-
superintendent,
if we
but it's
look
our
at this.
place to tell the school committee just because.
Our members, yes.
They also represent us because we're town members. So there's a difference between, is it the Board of Selectmen or is it Matt Urban saying, Mr. Brophy, this is what I'd rather you do as my representative? Or Deshan.
And they're supposed to be our representatives. That's,
They are representing the town. We have different opinions. I have no kids. Don't get me wrong, I don't know why Mike would feel like he has to listen to me. Other than I don't like him spending money. But nobody likes somebody else spending your money. So, I mean, it's all valid. Anyway, the agenda's over. I'm gonna give you a moment.
Everybody's money, so.
If you have something on the select board thing you want to bring up as a selectman you've been
I
initiating?
don't
or-
today, no.
Dylan, you got anything?
I don't have anything tonight.
Andrew, do you have anything specific? Okay, we're almost done with these meeting minute motions that's been on the floor for a while, and we talked about other stuff.
I move to accept May 6th agenda.
Okay. We'll just go back.
Sure, I'll second the motion to accept May 6th meeting minutes.
Call for a vote.
Aye.
Aye.
I was not present on April 1st, so.
Oh, come on now. That's, you can just say I choose not to vote. Okay.
So I'll read you the motion to approve the April 1st meeting minutes in 2019.
And I second that. Call for a vote.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you very much. Good enough. And we have an executive session.
You missed, thing on your agenda. Probably got lost, the request to waive
Ambulance
the
fee?
ambulance fee?
Oh, I did. You're right, I did miss it, and I don't want to continue to miss that. The information was presented, I had reviewed it. Both members, thank you for bringing that up again. Either of you have questions or thoughts?
Well, he's given us some clarity on it, but it still doesn't get frustrated. If he's paying $15,000 for his own personal insurance, that's a lot, and why they don't cover something of that is beyond me. It seems like the insurance is not covering any portion
Because
of
there's
this.
no other entity contributing to his insurance, so it's just him.
I know, but it's
That's my guess.
You would think his insurance policy would, whatever he has for his care would do some ambulance coverage, but an acknowledgement of his situation, I think it's reasonable to waive the fee for.
Yes, Claire?
Like, I sent you a note on that, is that his deductible for his policy? Because families have like a 2,000 or 3,000, or some of them are 4,000, depending on what they decide to pay for their insurance as their deductible each year. And they have to pay that first.
Right.
So I wondered, when I had seen it
It mentioned,
before,
he did
is
mention
that his
something about the
deductible?
deductible.
And if it is, then he should be prepared to pay that. You have to pay it every year.
Oh, Agreed, that's the plan until something else in your life hits you and you don't have, you know. Most people don't jump into a health plan and not plan to pay it.
Make payment.
I do not disagree with that.
That's how.
But I also understand that if somebody, and he did put it, so this is in writing, I'm not making, you know, I'm not sharing stuff that isn't technically public. But the way he presents it, and he says, he provides this information to the board under the pains and penalties of perjury, which is, I don't know if that means any legal binding anything, because there weren't witnesses and notaries. But he says to ask the Board of Selectmen to consider the annual cost of his health insurance of his and his wife's, joint,
Right.
not individual, of $15,753, and then compare that. He actually says juxtaposed with the amount of our limited unearned income for 2019 will be less than $38,700. So if he's saying that despite the $2,000 bill for the ambulance, he already pays $15,000 for his premiums
For Tufts.
and his coverage because he was self-employed. So he has no other pension for working for someone else.
Why doesn't he qualify for Mass Health? That's based on your income.
He might, but they wouldn't back pay this either.
It's based on your income if you did a good job showing your income over your life. I don't know
No.
his entire history. If he's
No,
saying he was self-employed,
Yes.
He qualified. He may qualify.
but how
at that
much
level.
does he qualify for is what I'm saying.
Yeah,
Because he's
probably
got
not
to be able to
Mass Health.
justify it.
But probably the Mass Health Connector, you could he should look into that. You could probably qualify for Health Connector.
That
Mm,
for two people at 30-some thousand.
You still have to
Yeah.
pay.
you probably have to pay in the Health Connector, not the free Mass
I know
Health.
people that get it and they don't pay.
I have to pay. I work.
All I'm saying is,
part-time.
I don't know.
Yeah.
But
That's
we
fine.
did ask for more info, and he provided more
Yeah.
info, and it does seem to appear that he's having an income versus expenses issue. He is retired, his wife is retired. It seems to suit the type of situation that I would recommend providing some type of help to.
And he has health
And
insurance.
all it is
It's not like he doesn't carry it.
Not receiving some of the revenue you planned on versus paying him a check. In other words, we're not pulling more money.
Yeah.
And what are we, 80% collection rate anyway, so this isn't gonna necessarily probably change that estimated total of collections significantly from our collection rate.
And this also
That's my
goes back to
thoughts. I don't think-
retirees on fixed incomes.
But we gotta be careful on the precedent.
Yeah, that's what I'm,
Yeah.
that other people are gonna try the same thing.
Well, I think mostly people aren't paying these. Mostly their insurance companies are paying them. That's where most of the collections are driven from, is the insurance companies. And probably most of these collections are probably paid. I don't know if I would have to ask. I don't know if they're paid in full, but I suspect the insurance company pays a portion. And then the people may or may not pay their last portion, whether we pursue that a little bit. But in his case, his insurance company is picking up zero. They're leaving him with the entire $2,100 ambulance fee balance. Which my concern was he didn't even have insurance. If he's not paying insurance, he should pony up and pay something. But he's paying quite a bit. He's paying quite a bit for his insurance and the other
Well, didn't
things.
his insurance pay something? $60 or something?
On one of his scans, one of some of the things he had done, processes, but not on the
I do
insurance
have a
tab.
good question though that I am confused about, where it says the amount being sought by the town of Berry is the balance of the amount due to satisfy personal deductible with the health plan. So the next question I have is, if he pays this, his health insurance covers his health costs for the rest of his current insurance year.
It would sound like if that's what that means.
Yeah.
But if we waive it, he's still got $2,000 left he's gonna have to pay for the rest of the year
Yeah.
until he pays
That's
it.
deductible.
Which he may or may not have to pay any of it if he's.
So he's just asking the next person to waive it the next time he gets a bill. And unless I'm wrong, and maybe I am, I don't know who's done Medicare, whatever type of retirement health plan. See, for me, I work for the city, so it's a fiscal year thing. So my health benefit plan technically ends May
But
to
maybe he hasn't.
June
had
type.
it.
So I'm wondering,
Medical.
does this mean that this year's about to end and waiving it? Or does this mean he's still got 6 more months?
They go calendar year.
In other words, waiving it doesn't change because he's just gonna ask us to waive it the next time if he gets called. Or if he pays it now, then we get paid by the insurance company the next time
Well,
because the
he-
deductible was paid.
And like I said, he didn't demonstrate ability to pay or not pay, and that may or not.
Well, he
may
made
have
statements to identify his low income.
Right, doesn't mean.
They've
he-
got a joint income of $38,000.
Still, there's a possibility that he ran his own business, he's retired at 62 years old, and he's amassed $4 million he has in the bank and has
He might
assets
be
and properties.
65.
We don't know what, we don't know what he has for,
He's 62.
we don't know what he has for wealth, and individual wealth and assets. So he may, I mean, you can clarify one more time, but, and under an income would generally, I would think, mean returns on his investments, whatever he's getting towards that, so. It's not a lot of cash flow in. He may have substantial assets he's living off of beyond that, but I would doubt it at that level of unearned income. There's probably not a lot. And we could ask to clarify it, but I would suspect that if that's their anticipated and honest anticipated unearned income, that there's not a wealth of
But
assets that they're drawing
If
from.
it's his $2,000 deductible on the insurance policy,
Then he'll pay it sooner or later, unless, if he has another incident, he'd pay it sooner or later, right?
yeah, he'd have to pay it.
Just see whether or not the town will pick up.
Yeah, well, we could ask the town of Ocam if they'd pay towards it. Well, if he doesn't pay, it doesn't, we don't have it.
I mean-
Braintree we have the agreement with.
Here's the situation. I don't know him for anything. I've read 2 letters from him. Both letters have given me just enough to say that it sounds like if he's being honest, he's in a position he could use help. But it also sounds like even if what he presented is honest, there's very possibly a lot of information he didn't present that changes the whole way I would look at this had I known the whole picture.
Maybe he should come to a meeting in person.
I'm not against helping someone, but I don't want to get stuck in this because I think we've all done something where we help someone and we realize the rest of our lives we're helping. And it's not really helping, it's just someone's appreciating your open back pocket and working. And I can sometimes see something like this potentially being that. But I also think he did take the time to actually write these letters, provide his records. He provided something from his, I don't know what he provided there, but an account statement from Tufts saying how much he owes, even though it doesn't specifically say it's regarding the ambulance. It just is something that says he owes so much money.
This is just the tax brackets for.
And then in the back, it shows some type of claim details about why it costs this much.
Oh,
You owe $2,100 to the town of Berry for ambulance. But if you go to the front one, it's a total of $2,625. And then there's a prior balance of $1,300 that he had to owe right away.
That's
So when I look at all of this,
It's a Tufts plan, yeah. The 1312 is their monthly payment on their Tufts plan, I believe. It says Tufts.
So
Health
anyway.
Plan, but- If we're
do I have
ta-
a motion if we want to grant any type of consideration? Or do we want to table this and have some more information? Like have him come to us, have him, I don't want him to come to us without us saying, what do we need from him? I don't just need him sitting at a chair telling me what he wrote in a letter.
If these, well, once again, if you want to clarify to make sure, it's like, can we look at your tax return to make determination? If that number's honest, I'm all in favor of it. That's $38,000 for a 2-person income to survive for a year, everything included, is tough. And a $2,000 unexpected hit in an ambulance is huge.
It is. And I don't know the
And it's-
circumstances why he chose to retire at 62 if his wife was a homemaker.
Don't know.
Because I don't know anybody at 62 right now that can retire and get your full anything. Even Social Security.
Mhm. We could certainly ask and clarify that and see, and make a good opinion from there. If he's just figuring he has enough, he can
It may
skate-
just be
skate
a
and
life
not work.
choice, like him or his wife realized something like,
And if it's
I don't
just
have
a
long
life choice,
time to
maybe he
live,
has the
so we're
ability
gonna
to go
retire
get a
and go
part-time
work.
job.
So I'm not saying that he isn't necessarily making good decisions with the options he has. So that's not fair of me.
Maybe he could work part-time for 4 or 5 weeks and pay it off if he's not working. I don't know. Maybe he can't work, but that's the things we could ask him. If we want to specifically clarify why you're not working, do you have a disability, or why are you choosing not to work? If he's choosing not to work, he could certainly make some money somewhere and pay it. If there's a reason he
So,
has an inability to
what
work,
type of
that's
action should we take on this so we can finally get these guys out of here? I think they're really tired of listening to us
Sorry,
talk
Ed.
about stuff that's really not specific to
Sorry
them.
I brought it up.
Well,
No, you were right. You were right. I
Curious.
on the surface, it
thought it would have been a
seems-
quicker, just cut and dry deal with it, but it wasn't.
Yeah, but with considering that, if he has the ability to work and is just choosing not to work, then I'd say, tough, get a job and pay the bill. But if it's not, if there's a reason he's out of work and he's not working, I think that's a big hit to take on that income. So we could ask for clarification as to why he's retired at that age. That's a very young age to retire. If he's capable of going and working, why not go get a part-time job and pay it off? If it's just because he chooses to sit at home and say I'm retired and go for walks and play shuffleboard, then that's his choice. Then he's got a bill that he's got to pay. But if something's happened, if he has a disability, he can't perform his job anymore, and he can't do it anymore, and that's why he's out of work, I would like to help. So we can clarify the situation one more time.
Could you have our treasurer look at this and see what type of information she would ask if she was gonna deal with somebody that's asking for, or the tax collector, treasurer tax collector? If someone said, I have $2,000, how do I justify my request for help? We'll even say, what would she ask to verify that person's situation? And then take that information and try to ask Peter Clifford for whatever she would ask to verify a person's financial situation, to say, you qualify for a certain payment plan, or you qualify for such and such. And maybe we can ask Mr. Clifford to provide some type of payment plan.
Then we could do that as well.
And even cut it in half.
Do a payment.
Pay me
plan.
1,000, not 2,000, but pay it to me at $100 a month, or whatever.
Would you like to put that motion forward in place of that and just move forward with that? Collect half the debt at $100 a month and see if he's satisfied with that, and let him find a way to pay. Because this is, of course, being demanded in full.
No, I would still like to hear from the treasurer on how she follows up with someone saying, I can't afford this, because I'm sitting here saying, the story looks good,
It does.
but how do I verify it? And I'm hoping that treasurer collector would be able to say, this is how you verify, this is what someone has to give you for you to verify their financial situation when making a decision on a
And
debt.
should we ask that he also follow up with Clifford on those verifications before we meet again, so that could be settled next time?
You know, and maybe she's not the right one, but reach out to someone that you believe is the right one that says, this is how you do it. But that's all I want to do before we do anything else. I don't want to offer a payment plan. If this comes before me again, I just want a standard. This is what you have to provide to us to ask this type of.
We're gonna have to work on that policy, obviously.
Right.
Which is what we're doing, again, without starting to get into it, but we're forming a policy. And maybe another night when we're not so busy, maybe in our downtime, we could discuss some of these policies and put some meetings directly towards these issues and create some policies for things like this. Because the clear path we talked about for other things, town permits and getting through the navigation of town, is the same with this. It'd be nice to have it for us, a clear navigation.
I agree. Can I have a motion to go to an executive session? Thanks, Claire. Have a good night.
Make a motion, we move to executive session per Mass General Law, Chapter 30, Section 21A, Exemption 2. And we will only come out of executive session to adjourn?
From the open meeting.
From the open meeting.
For pretty much just means we won't do further open public meeting business after this,
So
so
there's no
people
need to
don't
stay.
leave and then we try to do stuff without them watching us. Call for
Yeah.
vote,
I did. All right, Greg O'Sullivan, yes?
Matt Urban.
Somebody didn't second before you voted.
Yeah, I'll second it.
Okay.
I knew he was gonna, I thought I heard him say it.
I had that look in my eye.
The roll call votes, Greg
Felt it.
O'Sullivan's yes.
Matt Urban, yes.
Mm.
Do you mind closing the door, chief?